Good evening and welcome to our 23rd meeting of fiscal year 2022. Let's see, we'll do introductions. Denny Swenson, Chair. Rich Beeler.
Rich Beeler, Secretary.
Excellent. Meredith.
Meredith Hall, member.
Kathleen.
Kathleen O'Donnell, member.
Cheryl.
Cheryl Tagayas, member.
Okay, and our town staff. Tim.
Tim Zerwinski, Director of Planning and Community Development.
And Julia.
Julia Getman, clerk.
Thank you. Okay, so for our next meeting dates, we have March 14th, March 15th, March 24th. Now, March 14th.
Denny, sorry, that's actually a misprint, and that's my fault. I had forgotten that we're doing town meeting on the 14th and the 16th instead of the 14th and the 15th.
Okay.
I think it's a mistake anyone could have and may have made. But
yep, I just buzzed right through it, so it didn't look wrong to me. So I can see how that could happen.
Oh, that's great, because I have to do an introduction at a museum at 6:30 on Tuesday. So I was wondering how I was going to do that. So great.
You had palpitations for no good reason. So
well, there's a lot of reasons to have palpitations these days.
Okay, so the 14th and the 16th, and Tim, what time did we decide on? 6:30.
we decided on 6:30 for both of those days. I think there's a little bit of discussion that I think we want to have at least on Monday. But if not, we can all hang out.
Okay, so it's safe that way. And we, I did check with town council, and we can have an earlier meeting and close the public hearing on the temporary apartment bylaw earlier. We would just need to put it on our agenda on the 14th and agree to close the meeting earlier, say on the 17th, so that the warrant committee would have our vote in time to make their decisions. So I propose.
Yeah,
Did you say we're meeting on the 17th?
Yes, that's what, yes, I that would be a Thursday. And I'm sorry, Tim.
Denny, do you want to
No.
intro this concept a little bit more? So we had continued the citizens petition public hearing to the next planning board meeting on the 24th. Waiting to kind of see what happened with the ADU article at special town meeting. The warrant committee kind of needs a recommendation from the planning board earlier than that. And so that's why Denny had spoke with town council about, what are the mechanics of kind of changing the date of that continued public hearing. And we can do it, or you can do it if you sort of put it on an agenda, discuss the rescheduling, and effectively choose a new date.
I have a CPC meeting on the 17th.
Okay.
I mean, it was going to be on the 16th, but if town meeting's on the 16th, that's going to have to move. So, but that starts at 6 and is over by 7:30.
Okay, so
So I can do 2 at once, but
No,
I won't be
no.
paying a lot of attention.
well, okay, would you want to do ours at 7:30 then?
Yeah, if you could just say 7:30, or you can start the rest of them, you can do other things, but if you want to just say the public hearing on the temporary apartments at 7:30, and I'll sign on and,
Okay,
vote to close it, whatever.
okay, let's do that. So I'm just marking the 17th, 7:30, temporary apartment bylaw. Okay, that's good. And we will need to discuss that at our meeting on the 14th to do everything properly. So
that's on the agenda for the 14th. So same
Okay.
conversation that we just had right now. We'll just have it officially.
okay, well, that's good. I think that's really helpful for the warrant committee to have our vote in. Okay. All right, approval of the minutes. Julia, how many, is it just February? What are the minutes that we need to approve?
January 27th, February 8th, and March 3rd.
Okay, I'm sorry to say, I've only gotten back to you on February is it February 8th?
February.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't get to see the other two sets, but I'm okay to approve those with that change that I sent to everyone, if we all agree to Cheryl's amendment and my amendment.
On which date now?
February 8th.
Do we have the,
Can
sorry,
I
I
see
don't.
see what it looks like
Mhm.
now?
And Deb, I'm sorry, did we receive March 3rd? I don't recall receiving March 3rd.
Yeah,
Right.
I put it in the folder yesterday.
Ah,
Oh,
okay.
okay. I'm sorry.
I missed that. So, yeah, so if we can wait on March 3rd, but
Which
I'm
ones
good.
do you want to see up on screen?
February 8th.
That's going to be annoying. My wife got a new phone and her text messages show up on the computer next to me. That's the sound that you're hearing. So let me,
I have it. Do you want me to share it if I can?
I got it. I'm going to,
Okay.
so there should be edits in red line. Is that correct?
I think so.
yeah, so I think the red, like where it says under current zoning, were my edits. I think there's a couple other places that they show up in red, and I think Denny's, yours are there in the middle there, right?
I was fine with Cheryl's, and I just had that one cross out.
Well, why are we crossing out the letters?
Because there weren't 100 letters of support. I did acknowledge there were 100 signatures. There were over 100 signatures, and I did acknowledge that, but there were not 100 letters of support.
Where does it say 100 signatures?
I verbally said there were 100 signatures, and she said that I mischaracterized when I didn't.
Oh, I see. You're quoting. I see what it is doing here. I'm sorry. I'm just trying to see what was happening with what.
Confusing now, yeah.
Sorry. And I don't see very well. I'm telling you right now. I just don't see very well. And I've got it confirmed by my eye doctor that I don't see very well. So I'm looking at this very tiny print. Okay. All right. Sorry.
Okay. All right, so I guess, Rich, do we want to approve those and wait and approve the other two next time?
No, I just have a question. Sorry. I see what you're saying about the cross out, but it also says that that she stated. So if she stated it, it's still a statement. Wouldn't you just put a correction underneath it?
Well, she's saying that over 100 letters of support had been provided but were not acknowledged, and that the board mischaracterized information. I did not characterize information because there were not 100 letters of support.
No, I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm just saying, though, it looks like the way, I'm sorry, Julie, did you write this? If you wrote it, then it was written as, it looks like a quote to me. And I'm just saying, can you really cross out a quote? Why wouldn't you just put a clarification underneath it?
That makes sense to me because it is a quote. I mean, that's what she said. So
You're going to change it from not being a quote. I mean, I'm just,
Be fine with that. Pretty sure she said they were letters.
oh, yeah, I just, I'm
I just
not disagreeing with you.
the fact.
Complain
but-
after.
But I can double check it. I'll just go back and watch the tape and confirm that, and then.
Why don't we wait? I just don't want anybody to call in or ask you why we changed a quote.
It's not changing a quote. It's just, okay.
I agree with Julia's suggestion that she go back and check the tape. I did not do that on this one. And I agree with Rich that that if that's what she said, that it could be left in, but you could have a clarification to your point.
Yeah, because I'm not disagreeing with you, Debbie. I'm just, you know what I'm saying? I'm just, because the way it was written, it says Linda Champion of 19 Aberdeen stated that Milton, and so that sounds like a quote.
And so then we would put a star and
Yeah.
fact check, because we didn't, I mean, okay. I mean, if there
We
was,
could also say it was acknowledged and corrected that it was 100 signatures rather than 100 letters?
And that would be perfect in my opinion.
Yeah,
Okay,
that's fine.
Yeah.
all right. That's a great idea. Thank you.
Okay.
Are the other edits okay? I mean, the other,
Yes.
I think Cheryl, I accept Cheryl's amendments.
I agree.
okay.
So we'll take up all three at the next, on the 14th. Is that what we're planning to do?
That sounds good.
Yep.
Okay.
Can we do them on the 17th instead? I've already corrected the agenda for the 14th once already. We don't have approval of minutes on there, so I'll just,
It's too late to repost that anyway.
That's fine.
it's too late, that's right.
17th is fine with me.
Are these all online meetings?
What was that?
The
Are they
7th, oh, will we be in person? That's the next question. Will we come? I think for the 17th, that's just quick business, I hope, because it would just be a quick vote on that ADU. I'd like to keep that a light agenda and still keep our 24th meeting, if others agree. Just have a very light, quick, quick business.
So
Famous
she says
last
with hope in her heart.
Those are famous last words, but that would, my goal is to do that Zoom and maybe go in person on the 24th if others are interested.
Mm-hmm.
We can decide next week if we want to go live on the 24th, but let's keep
Well,
this
as I said, since I'm phoning in from another meeting, it would be great to just do it on Zoom the 17th,
Yes, I agree. Okay. All right. So
if you don't mind.
I don't mind at all, Kathleen. Yep, others don't mind too, but okay, so staff update?
Yeah, so we're hard at work. Yesterday was Allison's last day. That's the ghost town without her. That's not true. Me and Julie are still having a party and planning. So we are, her position was posted last week. We've already gotten a handful of resumes. I think there are some promising candidates already. So I don't know what the process of sort of interviewing for a replacement for the assistant town planner is going to be, but hopefully we'll have someone in place relatively soon and get them kind of trained up. And we'll see, depending on kind of their experience, qualifications, interests, we'll see what kind of role they have in terms of staffing the planning board and other committees. But we'll want to make sure that happens with some speed. A couple other things we have on April 7th. I believe it starts at 6 o'clock. We're having a virtual public meeting about our bike and pedestrian master plan. We've been working with our partners at the Metropolitan Area Planning Council to do this. This is a project of the Master Plan Implementation Committee, but it's been a kind of a thing that's been on our to-do list for quite some time. So they've been hard at work kind of evaluating our current bike and ped network, and they're going to have some proposals and some ideas to present on the 7th. One thing that I've been doing, in addition to kind of general outreach, is I've been targeting our friends at the Milton Public Schools. I've been in touch with all of the principals who are great. I haven't really tended to have a lot of interaction with the schools, but I've been doing a lot more recently, and they're really a real good squad over there running the schools. They're just great. And so I've asked all of them to kind of share with their, various newsletters. The one thing that I see when the weather's nicer and I ride my bike up Brook Road, even in bad weather, there are, a dozen at least bikes, locked up at the pits. And in the springtime, it's just gangbusters. I mean, they don't have enough space for those kids. And so, we want to put, a real strong priority on the safety of our students and their families getting to and from school. There's a principle that, if you design your city for an 8-year-old and an 80-year-old, you'll be in good shape. And so that's kind of a little bit of a philosophy we take to things. So hopefully we get a lot of interaction from the schools community. But MAPC will be running that. I'll be staffing it. You all are welcome to come. It's not technically a planning board meeting, but it should be good stuff. The other thing I wanted to bring up is we have a couple new applications that have come in that I'd like to, I don't think that they're enormous lifts, and I'd like to be able to try to dispense with them in our early April meeting. The first is, for those of you that have been around for a while, say special permit renewal for A. Thomas and Sons Landscape on Randolph Ave. That special permit, forget if it's a 2-year or 3-year, I think it's a 3-year renewal cycle, but they're up. And so we'll need to have their special permit renewed. So we've got all those materials. Marion McKettrick is representing the applicant on that one. I think it's pretty straightforward. This one is, you know, a pretty simple, as these things go, special permit. I don't think we have a long history, or quite frankly, any history of complaints, but I'll make sure that we talk with the building commissioner ahead of time about that. So that's something that I'm hoping we can get over and done with. The other is, and I may have previewed this previously. You've amended the special permit for Walcott Woods on a number of occasions. One of them was a full-blown special permit amendment back when they switched architecture and kind of design concept. And they've had a couple of, you know, what we've all considered to be minor changes of that special permit, mostly to do with, you know, swapping out unit configurations. Those have all been deemed to be minor changes, but, you know, I think as they're going through the site and as they're kind of doing the site work, they're starting to learn that, like, this is probably going to be something that we're going to deal with on each one of these pods. So what I asked them to do is really, you know, sharpen their pencils, kind of try to predict out what's going to happen, and try to get these things done in one shot rather than come back a half a dozen more times for the minimus changes. And so they've been working on that. And so they've done an evaluation of their site, and they have a little bit of a better idea of, like, you know, now that we know how the first bunch have been going, you know, here's what we think. And it's all similar, you know, changes, you know, taking a pod of like a CB pod and turning it into a DC pod. Unit count's not changing, site plan for the most part not changing. There are some material changes on a few of the pods. I think clapboard. You guys can take a look at that. And then I think the other relatively big thing, and I say big, you know, with you know, whatever, is I think they want to try to put 2 units in the Walcott house as opposed to 1 unit. And then that would take a unit out of one of the pods. I don't recall off the top of my head. So that's kind of the gist of what they're proposing. You know, none of it is, I think, is really dramatic. It's of a piece with a lot of the minor changes that they've made. It's just they're all kind of together this time. So I would like to be able to schedule those public hearings for, let me look at my calendar, for April 14th. One way or the other, the A. Thomas hearing has to happen on the 14th. We got that application a little bit ago. I think in order to accommodate town meeting and all the public hearings around zoning, I kind of pushed that application out a little bit, but we're going to be approaching the statutory kind of limit of when we can actually open that thing. And then, you know, there's less of a statutory kind of deadline crunch on the Walcott Woods one, but also I think that both of these are manageable enough that we can, you know, start them. And, you know, if we have to continue one or the other, you know, I think we can get a good bit of work done on both of those on this meeting. But it's up to you all. You know, the only requirement is, you know, I think we have to have the landscaping business one. So that's all I've got for now. There may be an A&R or 2 coming in, but we'll squeeze those in. They should be easy. So yeah, I don't know what your all thoughts on that are.
I think it's a good plan. I don't see a lot of other things hitting us early April. So I think that will fit, and I think we might as well get it out of the way. And it's usually improvements, the architectural improvements. So I'm hopeful it will be more of the same. So I don't know, does anyone else want to weigh in on that? Okay.
That sounds good.
Okay, Good. All right, then. We can do citizen speak now. Would anyone like to speak on anything that's not on the agenda? We have a public hearing on the 88 Wharf special permit regarding 41 Wharf Street land transfer, and that's really related to parking. And then we're going to talk about the MBTA community zoning comments. And then our old business tonight is the special town meeting articles and 440 Granite Avenue. But does anybody want to speak on anything else tonight? Looking for
Jenny,
hands.
did we have MBTA communities on our agenda? Sorry, I
Tonight,
don't have it in front of me. Yes, we do. Okay.
it's on our agenda. We wanted to talk about it tonight and at our next meeting what we had on the 24th, because the select board needs to get their comments together by the very end of the month. So we wanted 2 opportunities to weigh in. So
Yeah, I just, I tuned into the select board meeting where they asked Tim to share the draft letter that he prepared with us. So Tim, is that forthcoming?
That's in the folder right now.
we can pull it up when we get to that on the
Okay.
agenda, if you like.
All right, sorry, I didn't get to look into the folder today. I did yesterday, but not today.
Yeah, sorry, I was scrambling around doing stuff. I didn't send an email.
Okay, last call for our citizen speak, and you are welcome to speak when we get to the topics if you'd rather speak directly to those. Okay. Oh, great. Nobody for citizen speak tonight. Maybe we'll hear from you later. So we can open the public hearing for 88 Wharf. Can we move Ned Corcoran over? I think it's Ned Corcoran who will be presenting on that. And Ned, do you want to invite anyone else over? Just raise your hand if you're with Ned Corcoran tonight. Is Sean with us?
I think I have co-host ability, so I can move
Good.
folks up.
Thank you, Tim.
Yep. Ned is in the limbo area of.
Of our Zoom business.
Ned, was there anyone else on your squad that needs to be promoted?
Possibly Norm Novinsky and Eugene Sullivan may be looking for opportunity to speak.
I don't see Gene out there, but I'll keep an eye on him to see. And Norm, I'm pressing the promote to panelist button. You should get a dialog box that comes up. So we'll try to get you up. But I think we can probably get started.
I'm not anticipating necessarily Mr. Novinsky would need to speak, but he is a member of the board of the condominium association, so be helpful to have him available. And good evening.
Good evening.
Welcome to March.
Here we are.
Wow. Thank you for the opportunity to be back. If I can share a screen, I think and get an overview of the history of the development of the 41 Wharf Street property, and then get into the specifics of what we're requesting.
So Ned, you should be able to share.
Yeah. Okay, so this is 2 plans. So in 2002, as part of the first land unit overlay district that was created in Milton, the property at 88 Wharf Street was redeveloped. It was the old Hendry's ice cream plant that burned in a spectacular fire in the late 1990s, 2000 timeframe. Following that fire, the town engaged in a process of creating a planned unit development for that property and the property that is now occupied by Extra Space Storage. The Canab Hood Company and Canab family went through a significant process with the town to propose and approve the redevelopment of that site into the 88 Wharf condominium development. There are 74, I think, residential condominiums and a couple of commercial condominiums, one of which is the restaurant in the building. And the properties that were owned by Hood and now owned by the condominium association are 88 Wharf Street, which is this property to the right, and 41 Wharf Street, which is this property down on the left. The town owns 25 Wharf Street, which is the town landing in the middle. The plan unit development process required certain number of parking spaces to be available. And at the end of the day, the special permit that was granted in the process of the negotiation required that the Wharf Street, the developer, build out the park amenities on 25 and maintain them, and build out and maintain 26 parking spaces for the public under easement to be granted to the town for that purpose, and then other maintenance and obligations and requirements. Let me back up here and changing the look. This is the easement plan that was recorded at the time that the special permit was granted. This is all 41 Wharf Street. It is subject to a permanent easement for 26 parking spaces here. Those parking spaces were to be developed on behalf as public parking spaces for the town. They counted within the total parking requirement for the Wharf Street development, but that they were dedicated as public parking spaces and available to the town as a permanent easement. There's an additional area here that's sort of outlined and hatched in that was to be temporary boat storage under a 12-year temporary easement that was granted originally in 2002. It expired by its terms in 2014, but has been continued for the last 7 years through a series of renewals, 1-year renewals, and most recently a 6-month renewal. And that is a temporary easement to the town, for the town to be able to essentially allow the Milton Yacht Club to store their boats at that location. Milton, the Landing Trust, the Condominium Association, retained obligations to maintain this entire property on behalf of the town, maintain access to the boat ramp at the far end that's on town property, maintain, as I said, park features and other elements at 25 Wharf Street, all as a condition of the permit. We started negotiating with the town about a year or so ago, where the town expressed interest, the select board, and I think the group that, the committee that's responsible for sort of planning for redevelopment, potential redevelopment, new uses of the 41 Wharf area as town waterfront. We started negotiating with the town the notion of conveying title to 41 Wharf Street to the town. Town meeting in October as a part of Article 1 authorized the select board to accept title to 41 Wharf Street in a conveyance from the condominium association. There's certain conditions laid out in that agreement, which is attached to the materials that I filed. It also, a condition, and we still have not voted yet, but one of the conditions is that 75% of the unit owners of in the condominiums have to vote to agree with that conveyance, and that vote is coming shortly. But one of the conditions, concerns for the unit associations is to get out from under the maintenance obligations that exist in the special permit. And obviously, if we no longer own 41 Wharf Street, that the association wants to get out from under the obligation to maintain it. That was a condition that was laid out in the agreement with the select board. And so we're here with a request to amend the permit in that regard. We have one change basically to the request, and that is that the condominium association actually wants to continue to maintain this portion of the park. It's an attractive amenity. It's attractive in appearance for the unit owners as they come and go. And they want to make sure that it is adequate, continues to be maintained in a high quality, the extent that it is. So they want to maintain the lawn, all of the green features, if you will, the lighting, the lawn, the plantings, et cetera, associated with that area. Obviously do not want to continue to maintain the boat ramp down, the parking area, and other features. But so the request tonight is to, subject to retaining an obligation to maintain the park features here, to otherwise be released from obligations to maintain all of the open space and other requirements at 41 Wharf Street. The easement to maintain access to the boat ramp at Captain's Landing, that actually would go away by matter of deed. Once the deed conveys this property to the town, the permanent easement goes away because the town will now own title to that property, and any easements that the town enjoy over that property would lapse, they'd simply merge into the town's ownership of the property. But they don't want to, we need to get out from under the obligation to maintain the boat ramp and the other physical features, the walkways at 25 Wharf Street. I'll open it up there to questions. I would propose, if it's acceptable, to draft a simple amendment to the special permit that I would present for consideration of the board at your next meeting on the 24th. And thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Corcoran.
And I can continue to share screen if you want to look at it, or I can stop sharing and we'll do that.
Okay, we might call you to do that again, but Cheryl has her hand raised, so go ahead, Cheryl.
Yes, thank you. Given the special permit requirement for the parking spaces, my understanding is the restaurant parking is permitted separately from the building itself. And my understanding is those parking spaces are part of that restaurant special permit. So does an amendment need to be made to that special permit with this change?
I don't know, because I'm not entirely clear on the special permit that the restaurant has and what their use is, but if the town granted a special permit to allow them to use these parking spaces for their purposes, the town would still, presumably that permit's still in place, and the town would still provide that access to those spaces. I don't think it doesn't affect, the town now would own all of those parking spaces in fee with respect to the title of the property, as opposed to own the permanent easement for the use of those spaces. So I think that the restaurant's permit would remain in place. They might have to seek an amendment to the special permit to reflect the fact that it is now the town that owns the space, that the town owns the fee in those spaces and not just the permanent easement.
Okay, so I'll look to Kathleen or Tim to maybe to answer my question.
Well, I mean, it may need an amendment to that special permit, but that's not an application that Ned's client can file. He's only here with a special permit for his client. The restaurant's presumably represented by somebody else. They have to file their own application. We can't amend a permit that nobody's asked us to amend.
All right, but this is a change. Have they been notified of this change so that they know that they need to file an amendment?
I don't know if they need to file an amendment. Their permit authorizes them to use parking spaces that are under the control of the town.
Yeah, and we're under the control of the town, whether they're under the control of the town with an easement or they're under the control of the town in fee, it doesn't matter. And an easement that's long enough for whatever, the licensing for that is long enough, it's the same as a fee anyway. So I don't know that they would need to have an amendment to that.
Right now it's permanent easement to the town
Yeah.
provision of 26 parking spaces.
Right, so the only thing that's gonna change is, the easement disappears and the town owns it in fee.
If the town, in its wisdom as it goes forward and sort of repurposing the property affects the availability of those parking spaces, then the town would have to address that with the restaurant. But that would be that's a separate issue than what the condominium association is involved with.
Right.
So I guess that's a question that I had. I do remember this came to town meeting. Could someone refresh my memory? What does the town benefit from taking ownership of the land? Now they will be responsible for taking care of the property, cleanup, maintenance. There's a question of if they do anything other than a parking lot, there might be some chemical cleanup and so on and so forth. So it's like so how does the town benefit from taking ownership of the land?
My understanding is that the town wants to take over control of the entire waterfront. We want to repurpose what happens down there. There is provision for payment of some funds from the association to the town to cover any potential liability that might exist if contamination was uncovered. We don't see any reason why it would be, but there is a payment to the town to be held in escrow for that purpose. And that's spelled out in the agreement with the select board. But the town is interested in taking title so that it has the ability to manage the entire waterfront area, reconfigure how it might want to, and not have to worry about different ownership interests, different easement interests that exists back and forth. And so I think from the select board's perspective, there's a benefit to the town to doing that. And so, they're basically being paid a sum of money to take title. They're not paying the association for the property. They're actually receiving money from the association as part of this conveyance.
Okay. So Cheryl, I know you studied this part of town quite a bit for many years. Is that your sense? What do you?
Right. That's my understanding, what Ned expressed there. I just wanted to ask also, Ned, if the select board is apprised of this change that you called it for the association to take care of the park property, and is the select board in agreement with that?
I know that members have been apprised of it. We are meeting with two of the members and town council on Tuesday morning. We were supposed to have met this morning and it got continued to Tuesday morning to talk about some of the details of the transfer. But this is one issue. I don't see that the select board would have a concern with the association holding on to the maintenance of the green spaces down there, because I think the town spread with its ability to maintain green features. This is a focused opportunity for it's almost like an adopt a highway approach, where a private entity agrees to take on cleaning and maintenance of a certain stretch of roadway. This is similar. They'll be adopting the park, or in this case, just retaining the obligation under the permit to continue to maintain those features.
Yeah. Sorry, just follow up, Tim, may I? Just any change to it, though? There wouldn't be any change that would be sort of contemplated or allowed through it, right? So like some redesign of the space or different use of the space or what have you in that maintenance.
No, they were the association under the original permit was required to design it and build it the way it was built. And that was all approved by the planning board through the original process. It was all built in accordance with those plans, and they've had the obligation to continue to maintain it. It is a benefit to the condominium association because it provides a beautiful sort of front door to the facility, and they want to see that gets maintained. There's the farmer's market is held weekly in this and through the summer, spring, summer, fall, over on the green space across the way, and I think they have concern that doesn't get the same kind of attention that this property has gotten and will continue to get, and so they really want it. It was interesting to me that they wanted to hold on to an obligation to spend money, but they saw it as that they could really maintain control of how that property looks, and they want to do it because they thought it was important to do it.
But my question is then, let's say in the long-term planning of the wharf area, if the town wanted to change some aspect of that park, would it not be able to if the maintenance and upkeep is held by the association?
I think as the owner of the park would have the right to facilitate other changes. They'd have to negotiate with all stakeholders, obviously. But I don't think the town could, I would be surprised if the association said, hey, no, you can't do that. They don't own it. They don't have the right to make decisions about how it's reconfigured. They just agreed for as long as it's maintained in its current form, that they would continue to perform the maintenance. And we can reflect that, I think, in the language of the amendment.
Yeah, no, Cheryl, I just wanted to chime in. I don't disagree with anything that Ned characterizes as. I think it'll probably be fine, but I did make a note that I wanted to make sure that the select board was apprised of the situation. It's the planning board's permit, but it's going to be the select board's property. So we just want to make sure that they're kind of, fully abreast of the situation. So, I'll kind of let them know tomorrow via email. Just be prepared to have that discussion with Ned on Tuesday, and if they need to discuss it publicly, then they can kind of decide to do that. But I think it should be fine. I think everyone's very satisfied with how that piece of property is maintained, and if there's a status quo that we can keep going, I think that's fine. But they should be aware and have their eyes open.
I agree with Cheryl. I would like to see that reflected in the language. I think it's a win for the town because I think they do a beautiful job of maintaining that. But I hear Cheryl's concerns, and we could just memorialize it in the language. That would be wonderful.
I have my hand up.
Sorry, I wanted to call on you next. Sorry. Please go.
But I would disagree with that idea because, first of all, it's town property. Town's going to own it. If I'm not town council, but if I was, I would just be giving a condominium association a license to maintain that park, not a full-on easement, not a long-term contract. A license is just an agreement between the condominium association and the town, and it can be revoked at any time by either party. And so that gives the town and the condominium association the flexibility without putting it into a permanent contract. And I don't think it's really appropriate necessarily for it to be part of this permit. That's a discussion that the select board should be having with the condominium association. And I don't think that's, from my personal perspective, it's not something I think that the planning board should hold the select board's hands and tie them up to keep them from doing what they want to do. There's a proposal, to do the Milton Landing Committee is out here looking at all this stuff, Allison was working on that. If you read her farewell memo, which is very sad, she had served that committee. I know Steve O'Donnell's committee, has been looking at that whole area really carefully. And I would just like to make sure that in our amendment of this special permit, to sort of let the condo association out of the obligation to maintain property it no longer owns, that we don't do something that impedes the ability of the Historic Commission and the Select Board and the Milton Landing Committee to do what they want to do down there.
Okay. All right. Meredith, I noticed your hand is up.
Am I muted? No. I just wanted to say, I do think this is a win-win for the town. Obviously, we want to hear from the residents at 88 Wharf. I think that green space has greatly benefited and beautified that area tremendously. And as you approach, you go down, which could be eventually a kayak, launch area, really a beautiful area. And it's a very, very well maintained, well designed property. So, and I don't think that what I'm hearing from Ned is that they're asking for any change in a contract or any obligation that the town would be required to keep if we decided to change the use. But it's with all of the paved surfaces down there, it's really refreshing to go down there and see that green space abutting the water. So I'd like to see this move forward with select board.
I just add one other point, and that is that if the board grants an amendment to the permit, that amendment would be held in escrow until the conveyance occurs, because the obligation to maintain would not go away until after the town takes title.
So I have a question that currently, to Kathleen's point about license versus easement, what have you, what is the current situation in the special permit?
The special permit requires the association to maintain all of the features on both 25 and 41. They were required to construct them, and they're required to maintain them, including walkways, etc. They simply want to hold on to the maintenance of the green spaces at 25.
So they're really what they're asking for is the removal of that requirement for parcel 41.
Completely for 41. There's no green space that's maintained on 41. And they want to eliminate the obligations to maintain the hardscape on 25. The ramp, the walkways, the physical walkways themselves. They don't want to have to be responsible for resurfacing, repaving.
And there's a wall also, right? There's a wall that between the green space and the water, and they want to remove the requirement to maintain the wall as well, right?
They don't have any requirement to maintain the wall.
Okay. All right, so then the boundary at which they're maintaining is right at the edge of the ramp, is that right?
Yep.
Okay. So it's really then, it's not adding anything to the requirement of special permit, it's just merely removing a portion of the requirement, right?
That's
Okay.
right.
Okay, did we have any more questions or comments from the board? I'd like to open it up to the public. Public may raise their hands. Do we have any? Okay. Is there anyone from the public who would like to ask any questions or provide any comments on this special permit? One thing I wanted to say, I was interested to vote on this after the 88 Wharf Condominium Association voted. So that would be at a future meeting. And so we'd like to have Mr. Corcoran.
I can't do that. I need to know that the board has voted to amend the special permit as a condition. It's a condition in the agreement with the select board that the obligations would be removed by the planning board. The modification of the special permit would be held in escrow, would not become effective until it was recorded after the deed of the property from the association to the town is recorded. But I do need to vote approving the modification to the special permit. I can wait until 2 weeks and I can have a draft of a modification for review and approval. But I would request the board to continue it for that purpose. But I do need the board to vote favorably.
Mr. Chawinski, I was coming at this from a different understanding. I don't know if you have any further information to provide. I didn't think we were actually supposed to vote until after 88 Wharf had voted. But do you have any information you could add to this?
Yeah, I mean, Ned is characterizing it accurately. I can kind of double check with the select board about the exact kind of language of the agreement. I mean, we use the term chicken and egg kind of a lot, but the way that this agreement is kind of structured is kind of the one thing can't happen before the other. So I think that, whether it's, the concept of holding the decision in escrow, I mean, I don't know what we think about, conditioning the approval on, the successful transfer of the land. I mean, I don't know exactly what the mechanism is, but I think, everyone should understand and be clear that none of this happens until we actually get the land. That's the thing, because that was my concern initially, that, why are we doing this first before we actually sort of have this thing? And it's like, well, you're not going to have this thing until the condo association has the assurance that they're out of front of the obligation. So it's like, who blinks? Well, we all blink at the same time, and then, everything is fine. So
I can draft a simple provision in the modification that says it will become effective upon the transfer of title.
Okay. So it's a matter of the town has to get all of its ducks in a row in order to go to the condo association to ask.
Both sides have to get ducks in a row. The town has moved substantially because the town meeting authorized the receipt of the property. I still need a vote of 75% of the members of the owners of the condominiums to do that. But a condition, but to get to that, I need to know that the town is meeting its obligations.
Okay. Thank you. I noticed Meredith's hand is up. Is that?
I just wanted to say, I think it makes sense for us to see a draft of what is being proposed in the amendment. That would be helpful. And then, we can make that subject to the 88 WARF approval, maybe.
Okay.
I think we should make it a subject, not to the 88 WARF, and nothing goes forward if nobody else votes on it. I would just say that make it subject to the recording of the deed. I mean, and that's the last thing that's going to happen. And that would just be in our vote. That wouldn't be in the permit itself, because the permit, we'd have an escrow, agreement, whatever. It says, yes, we've signed it, and it's going to sit in escrow with Tim until it gets recorded with the deed.
So we could take a vote, right? And that's subject to review of the language.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
We've done that before. And Ned, that would give you what you're looking for tonight. Is that right?
Yes. And frankly, Nick, if the board votes 2 weeks from tonight, because it's reviewed language, that's fine.
Okay. All right. We could do, I think, let's see,
Thanks,
we have a vote, we have a meeting on the 24th. So,
Rich has his hand up.
okay, Mr. Beeler?
All right, no, just a quick question or just a comment. I mean, I'm good. This sounds good to me. I think somebody should put some thought into what Kathleen said about the licensing opportunity. I feel like, I like the idea that they're going to maintain it, and I see why, right? They wanted to make it look great, but I also don't understand why they'd want to have no way out unless there is a way out. So just something to think about. I mean, doesn't matter for me. It sounds great for the town. It just sounds like one party has a way out and one party doesn't, unless I'm not hearing correctly.
Yeah, I think I can kind of put this scenario in front of the select board. I think they are, I believe, meeting between now and then. If not in a formal meeting, they're meeting a couple times before town meeting next week, so they'll be together to discuss things. They were prepared to take on the maintenance obligations because this issue wasn't a thing. So I think one way or the other, everything, I'm sure they'll probably be fine with, someone else taking care of it. I do tend to think that, to Kathleen's point, a license agreement that's kind of terminatable on either side kind of makes sense. If we really want to start maintaining it ourselves, then we should be able to do that. It's our property. If they want to continue to do it, they should be able to if they want. So I think, those options, we'll put in front of them as the ultimate kind of property owner. I think they should have, some input into this. So I can get that information to the board before the 24th.
And as I said, we're actually meeting with 2 members of the select board and town council next week on this issue. So we will make that part of that discussion as well.
Okay. Well, that sounds good.
So I'd make a motion to approve the modification of the special permit for 88 Wharf to remove the obligation to maintain, I forgot the number.
41 and 25.
41, sorry. Not very good with numbers. Subject to completion of the transaction with the town of Milton
And review of the language.
and review of the language, sorry.
And do we want to say something just to make sure that it's good with the select board? I just want to make sure that's exactly what the select board wants.
Well, as I said, subject to the completion of the transaction with the town. So if the town doesn't like our permit, they won't record the deed.
And we can revote on the 24th if the select board aren't satisfied with that, but that's good.
Yeah,
Okay.
right.
Okay, just wanted to cover all bases.
No,
Is
that
that-
makes sense. Yeah.
Does anyone want a second?
Second,
Okay, let's discuss. I didn't know if,
can I have a question, Denny, on Ned, when do you think you'll have language available for us to review?
I'll try and get it to Tim by the end of next week. So you'll have it before next weekend.
Okay, so that would be the 17th or 18th?
The 18th.
18th, okay.
okay. Any further discussion? Okay, all in favor, Rich Beeler,
Yes.
Ms. Hall,
Yes.
Ms. O'Donnell,
Yes.
Mr. Giles,
Yes.
Jenny Swenson, yes. And I just wanted to, is there anybody from the public who wanted to comment or ask any questions on this? I'm not seeing any hands. Okay. All right, well, I guess we will see you on the 24th. Thank you, public, for coming out tonight. Thank you, Mr. Corcoran, for your presentation, and we will see you on the 24th.
And I will see you
Next week.
shortly. And I'll see you shortly on the discussion dealing with Article 1
Yeah.
amendments. I think you have something in between, and then I'll be back.
Okay, thank you for reminding me.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. So, Tim, we have the MBTA community zoning comments. So maybe we could pull up your letter, which is a draft that you've prepared, jumping point for the select board, as I understand.
Yeah, so they asked me to kind of write up some comments based on some of the commentary that and discussion that we had at their formal briefing last week or the week before, whenever it was. So they reflect comments that I think I've already made to this board. So I don't think anything should come as a surprise. My stance when I kind of propose these comments is coming from a place of, okay, here's what you're asking us to do. Here's the challenges that we kind of anticipate. And really, I don't think anyone has kind of proposed solutions. I think it's really up to the Commonwealth to kind of figure out, which elements of their kind of regulations or guidelines they're going to be, offering any kind of either relief or change or whatever. I also, I'm not entirely, it's a black box over there when it comes to, what is their appetite for actually kind of changing these things. So, we're just trying to throw, as much against the wall that can kind of help us get to a point where we can try to draft something that has a reasonable expectation of getting through town meeting, and B, has a reasonable expectation of actually achieving the Commonwealth's goals of actually producing, units. And I think those two things go together. If we just wanted to produce units, we would zone for whatever, but that's not going to fly in town. So let me share my screen real quick, and I'll just run through really broadly kind of the main points that I made. I also, I was at a 40B hearing last night, so I didn't actually get to see the select board's discussion of this. So I don't know if they actually think it's good or not. I'm sure they think it's fine. I don't know if they added anything, but basically, you know, what I said, and this should be familiar from our briefing. You know, the small parcel sizes in the area that is kind of subject to this zoning. Very difficult to actually get to a parcel size that can support any, you know, significant, you know, amount of kind of units on a given parcel. These are all, you know, 5,000 to 7,500 foot parcels. You know, you're not talking about, you know, places like 88 Wharf, which is multiple acres, 131 Elliott Street, which is multiple acres. You can kind of see it in the GIS map, which I included over here. I mean, this is Extra Space, this is 88 Wharf, this is, you know, Hendry's, this is 30 Elliott, like all of the big parcels actually already have multifamily on them. And so what we're working with is these sort of smaller parcels. And the framework that I used in these comments is, you know, if you want to, you know, A, produce zoning that has a chance of passing town meeting, and B, produce zoning that has the chance of actually resulting in units, you've got a dilemma. You know, and the one option is to work with the existing lots by requiring a low minimum lot size and allowing a small number of units on each lot. So really small scale development spread across the whole district. Or you require the larger minimum lot size and allow for larger buildings, which requires costly site agglomeration. I don't think that we are going to be in a situation where town meeting is going to go along with just letting her rip on 3 and 4 family buildings without any affordability requirement. You know, we've heard even in the ADU discussion that you know, people are concerned that ADUs are gonna start to crank up our denominator on our subsidized housing inventory. So that signals to me that, you know, the town is going to be interested in some sort of inclusionary requirement for this multifamily zoning, which I think is reasonable. Experience with inclusionary zoning on small projects, 3-unit, 4-unit projects is not good. City of Somerville recently passed zoning in 2019 that basically said you can, you know, you build 2-family houses all over the place. And if you want to build a 3-family house, the 3rd unit has to be deed restricted affordable at 80% of AMI. They've had 2 in 2 years, and Somerville is a much bigger city than ours, which will with a lot more. So, you know, if you were to go with this option 1 that I talk about, and there's a lengthy sort of discourse on this, you know, you're not going to actually produce units if you put an inclusionary requirement on a 3-family house. It's just not very likely to happen. In which case we would, you know, meet the requirements, you know, if they accepted it, but the actual spirit of the legislation, which is to produce more units in these suburban communities, really wouldn't get met. And then again, the second option, okay, you need to, you know, we have multifamily on larger lots. Now we've got to figure out a way to create larger lots. Well, you know, again, and I said this before, how reasonable is it to expect a developer to come and buy, you know, 4 $750,000 houses on Elliott Street to build a 15 or 20 unit apartment building? It just doesn't strike me as something that is going to pencil out. So that's one kind of primary dilemma that I lay out in these comments. Like, you know, if you want to actually do this thing, it's going to be tough given the existing parcelization plan. The other thing, and this is something that I had a discussion with Marion McKettrick about, is that the way that they define multifamily is 3 or more units, you know, which is fine. You may have noticed, if you had seen my presentation to the select board, one of the examples that I used of an area that actually meets the minimum density requirements is over on Belvoir Street, off of Blue Hills Parkway near the Tucker School. That's a 2-family neighborhood. If you ever walk down that street, it's a nice street, fine houses. It's Milton, and it's 15 units an acre. You know, we wouldn't be able to reproduce that under these guidelines because it's 2-family houses, and you know, you have to have 3-family or above. So, you know, what I say in these comments is, if you let us do 2-family houses, we can come up with zoning that is contextual and fits the neighborhood character, which I think is something that everyone is very interested in. By doing 2-family houses. That still kind of runs into the buzzsaw of the inclusionary requirement, but it's a separate issue. And I think, we're trying to kind of chase after things that I think would be acceptable to a broad population in town of Milton. This available area for the zoning district is, it comes from a comment that Kathleen made during our discussion. At first, and I still believe that ultimately there's plenty of room to do a zoning district in this area. This is, approximately 800 acres. We have to have a minimum of 50 and then a maximum of however much it takes to fill the density. But before I looked at other towns, other towns have it a little bit easier than we do, quite frankly, for the reasons that Kathleen and others articulated. Waltham, Wellesley, Weston, Dedham, Natick all have fewer commuter rail stations or T stations than we have, but also have a greater potential area in which to sort of do a zoning district. Because they're kind of squarely right in the middle of their municipality, and you get the full 500 acres to kind of work with. Without knowing kind of, what the shape of the district's going to be and what we're going to do, it's tough to know like what difference that makes. But just the fact that, we now are going to have to make decisions about, minimum density versus size of district, that elbow room kind of makes a little bit of a difference. It's still possible and easy is the wrong word, but it's still plenty of room, to do it. It's just, other towns have an easier time, quite frankly, because of that. So that's the available area for zoning district kind of point. And then the location of district relative to transit station. This is something that we talked about. I think Cheryl might have brought this up. As it relates to other areas of town that have transit access, either via the bus or, well, it would be the bus in Milton. The way that the guidelines define kind of what your kind of transit is by stations. So it's either a rapid transit station or a commuter rail station or a bus station. And a bus station is not a bus stop. A bus station is, it's got a few more amenities. It's got a building, it's got facilities. But so we don't have a bus station in Milton. So, we really are tethered to those Mattapan trolley stations. That being said, there is transit access in other parts of town, along 28 via the 240 bus, and then in kind of East Milton along Brook Road on Granite Ave via the 215, the 217, 45 bus. Those are the buses that go between Ashmont and Wollaston and Quincy Center. East Milton would be considered a eligible location under 40R, which is the smart growth law that Massachusetts has, which basically tries, it was our first kind of crack at trying to encourage, transit-oriented development, or at least smart growth, which is either transit-oriented by train station or whatever, or in what they call eligible locations, which are amenity-rich. There's shopping, there's services, there's amenities. To really try to encourage a more walkable lifestyle, maybe not necessarily a kind of, car-free downtown lifestyle, but something where you're not taking your car out every single time you have to do anything outside of your house. So, East Milton Square would count as an eligible location for that state program, but is not eligible for this state program. And I think there is an argument to be made that, what the Commonwealth is after is building more housing in appropriate locations. And they consider transit to be an appropriate location. I think there are other towns. I read a thing from the Charles River Chamber of Commerce that there's a lot of towns in their area that are, really gung-ho about this. Watertown, is probably the biggest producer of housing per capita in the Commonwealth right now. Even compared to Boston and Chelsea, they build housing like gangbusters. And even they said, yeah, we have a transit station, but we're really trying to build housing in this other area. And it would be great if, we could use these regulations as a boost to those efforts, which are not necessarily eligible, under transit. And so, this is something that, may need actual change to the legislation. I don't know if it's reflected necessarily in the guidelines versus the language of the legislation, but those are the really, I think, 4 broad points that I wanted to put out there for the select board to consider that just kind of highlight the difficulty that we're going to have in, and again, like I said, doing something that's going to pass town meeting and doing something that's going to achieve the goals of the guidelines. And the reason why that's important is what we don't want to do is go through all the trouble and then hand something to DHCD and have them say, actually, we don't think this is going to produce any units, so you got to go back to the drawing board. And so it's really important to keep those goals in mind at the same time. And so again, I don't know what type of relief they're kind of going to provide, if any. But these are things where if they kind of, change the dials on any of these 4 topics, it would make it a little bit easier for us to kind of do something that would achieve the goals. And so, without, I probably could have read this whole thing in the time it took me to explain all this. So that was my quick run through of the comments. And so, happy to either take questions or you all can kind of open it up for your own conversation.
I was wondering if you had thought about potential, and I don't know if this works, but potential micro zones that could be added up. And, it would be in like a 50-acre zone or whatever, but you just have these micro zones where you would do something where there's actually room, like where we already have some density, on, name your place, 88 Wharf or, Henry's, or, you have those and then you sort of add them up and potential other things. But does it have to be like one solid 50-acre thing, or could it be micro zones that add up?
Yeah, the way I understand, and Cheryl has her hand up, so I want to answer your question, but then I don't know if we want to go to Cheryl. So the zone doesn't necessarily have to be contiguous. You can do sub-districts, you can do overlays, but the 2 rules are, well, there's 3 rules. At least one of your, microzones, to use your term, has to be at least 25 acres. And then no overlay or sub-district can be less than 5 acres. And then the 3rd rule, obviously, is the minimum density. So it all needs to add up to at least 50 acres. So like under that scheme, you could conceivably do 1 25-acre kind of big sub-district and then 5 little 5-acre sub-districts. They don't necessarily have to be contiguous, but they have to sort of have, regulations that meet the regulations. And then, within that, the density of all those districts has to add up to 15 units per acre. But you can do as many, if you, and this is kind of what I got after in my select board presentation, if you do a low density, you're going to need to have a bigger area of your district. So you can conceivably have, a dozen of these little districts, depending on where you want to put them, if they're relatively low density. So yeah, it doesn't have to all be contiguous, but there are kind of, rules that you have to kind of fit it to.
Okay, thank you. Cheryl?
Yes, thanks, Tim. I agree with everything that you put forth, but I would like to have us, I think we've talked about before, open space and historic areas. And one of the things that I think, if we can figure out a way to make the point that we don't want to produce zoning that would have the effect of incentivizing destruction of historic properties or historic fabric. And I'm not quite sure, we've spent a lot of time being careful about that with the Milton Village zoning. And studying the tools that we put into the zoning to make sure that it wouldn't be an incentive to tear down some of the beautiful buildings to put up something else. So I think that's something I'd like to see in the letter, or suggest that the select board include in the letter. And the other thing is just how the open space also relates to urban tree cover and low impact development. We're at odds when we're trying to, take an area which is already fairly built out and build more in it, you know, potentially going up, I think is something you talked about at the select board meeting. But, you know, when we're looking at, you know, some of the way the multifamily is done, it takes up pretty much the whole site. And and most of the trees are removed. And there's not adequate room for low impact development, which is really where, like Wolcott Woods, where they're using some retention basins and there's some landscape there and so forth. So, yet the Commonwealth is encouraging that kind of development too. So where is the balance between the two, right? The balance between needing and wanting the density and not losing tree cover and not putting more stormwater into pipes and so forth. Considering we've got the Deposit River, Pine Tree Brook, all these things in the same area. I'd like for some language about that in the letter as well.
Yeah, and I'll make a note of that. And I think the sort of the paralysis that I think a lot of towns, including, you know, Milton, kind of find themselves in is taken individually. You know, each one of those things, how are you going to argue with knocking down trees or impervious surface or preserving historic, you know, structures and preserving all of these things are good things, but together they add up to we just can't build anything. And I think that's what this is trying to solve in quite frankly, a rather blunt, you know, fashion. And so I think these are all, you know, there's a way in which, you know, DHCD kind of needs to tell us how to, you know, what do you think about this? You know, these are all of the things that we think are important and we want to protect and prioritize. You know, what are you going to say? But I think what's going to wind up happening is there's going to be situations where, you know, we're going to have to make hard choices. And, you know, I think that's one way in which, you know, and I don't want to, you know, kind of put, I still like the idea of really low scale density across a wide area, because I think that's where it's similar to the conversation we had about condo conversion, where, you know, if there's an option where you could do something in the existing footprint that preserves, you know, the landscape, I mean, for whatever the landscape is for a 7,500 foot lot, you know, that becomes preferable to knocking down 3 houses and everything that's on the site to build, you know, a garden style apartment building. You know, the trade-off there becomes maybe you can't get the affordability that you want. And then you've got to make up for that somewhere else. So I think, you know, I'll those are all, you know, totally valid and totally important things that need to be kind of taken into consideration. Again, I think the answer is going to come back. It's like can't pick everything. You've got to pick a couple of things that you think are important.
Yeah, well, one thing I would say, if I may, just in follow up to that, is as you mentioned East Milton, it would be a justification or another reason why East Milton should be considered as part of an area, or maybe even Granite Ave, you know, down closer to the highway, or even, you know, maybe Granite Ave, you won't always need an office building in that location, you know. It's like, there's talk a lot about, you know, with the after effects of COVID, that office buildings may be converted to other uses now. And there's some labs, but there's also discussion about residences. And so we have a business district where was it 2 Granite Ave, where the Flatley building is. So I guess my point about it is really to think a little bit about what we asked about the bus stops in East Milton, and have it be that we can have a different catchment area. And the reason why we're talking about a different catchment area is because of the 3 things you already talked about. How we only have the boundary, because the Neponset and the stations are right along the boundary with Boston, we only have half the land. That a lot of that is open space related to the river and the waterfront, and it's already built out, and there's a lot of it that's historic. So we don't want to sacrifice the open landscape and natural features and historic character in districts it's putting housing above everything else. So we have to, something has to provide us with a little relief, and location seems to be the most appropriate relief. And maybe it's the total density. I mean, that might be part of it, but I think it's important to say that we're not saying that we're rejecting completely that we can do anything. I think we're saying we need to be more thoughtful because of these unique circumstances.
Yes, and I wanted to add to Cheryl's list, the sustainability principles, that are in the Massachusetts guidelines, adding the river or sensitive ecosystems. We want to be sensitive to the river and the fragile ecosystems near it, for obvious reasons. Meredith, you have your hand up.
I do. I just wanted to say to Tim, I just want to thank him for this first draft. I think there was a lot of really good information. I think it was very well written. I only found one typo, which I'll one small thing, an added word. But it was a really well written with a lot of really good information. And I especially like the graphics because I think it really makes a statement by what you put in there. The only things that I was going to add, included in the multifamily housing that you listed 51, Elliot, but you didn't list 36. And actually Milton Hill House is a separate, but it's also a very significant multifamily structure that is next door to 50 Elliott. I also wanted to ask, is the 800 acres that you listed, is there any way to back out of that DCR, conservation, and wetlands? Because I know it encompasses a good part of Turner's Pond, but I think that's also really important that we show sort of our natural resources on top of, we're built out, but we've got DCR restrictions, conservation, and wetlands, which I think impact a good part of that 800 acres. If we could demonstrate that, I would add that as well. And I also wanted to ask, you have 5 train stops, including the Mattapan station. I'm counting 4, but maybe am I missing something other near Capon Street? The Capon Street stop, obviously Central Ave and Adams Street.
Central Ave, Valley Road, Capon Street,
Valley Road. Okay, I'm sorry, Valley Road was the other one that I was missing. Okay. But I think there were a lot of good points. I do like the area of looking at other options and other subzones. I agree, especially particularly on the bus lines. I really see Randolph Avenue. There's other areas that I don't think we would need to put all the pressure on East Milton. I think they have enough pressure as it is. But Central Avenue is a major bus line, and there's actually a lot of 2 families. If you at the end of School Street and Central Avenue, if you sort of hook that corner on School Street and up Central Ave, there's just naturally a lot of 2 families that have existed with some, in the context of a residential neighborhood. So I like that low density option. And I just think there's other areas that we can also, which are on bus lines, that we could be looking at simultaneously to East Milton. But I think giving that example, maybe that's something that would open that door for us to look at other areas too. So.
Yeah, and I think that makes a lot of sense too. I'll have to look at how they kind of define, the figures that go into calculations of gross density and kind of area, because I think they do the point is well taken, whether or not there's a solution there, but there's the river and the city of Boston, and then also we've got all of this stuff, that is unbuildable. I think a lot of towns have cemeteries and parks and everything in their areas. So I don't know, but it is a point to make. And I think to further the other options that we're trying to put on the table. And I think that, I don't know which way they're going to go, but I think, we're going to, let me just be candid. We're going to wind up doing things that we would probably rather not do if they weren't making us do it. But I think the whole point of this exercise and this kind of thought process is there are ways to sort of do this in ways that spread it out and really kind of don't concentrate things in a way that are going to, the other thing that we kind of talk about is there's not a ton of renter households in Milton. There's more than you'd think, but less than maybe there should be. We're 75% owner occupied. And a lot of those are in the catchment area of the T, especially around, Mattapan Station and Capon Street Station, along Elliott Street. And, it's one thing if you're a homeowner and you say like, oh, great, my property got upzoned. Now I can, build a 4-unit house where my single family house used to be, time to get paid. There are renter households there that are at the whim of property owners. And so, I don't want to overstate the risk of kind of mass displacement, through upzoning. It's not like, in Dorchester or Roxbury or Mattapan where there's a lot more renter households that are at risk. But, this is the part of town where a significant number of renter households are. And so we do need to be sensitive to that. I think, I don't think that's necessarily something that, the Commonwealth is going to let us hang our hat on, if only because, the whole point of this whole exercise is to increase the supply of housing and to put an effect on prices for everybody. But I do think that there is an argument to be made that, like, if you spread this around to areas where the people that are going to be making the decisions are owners, that, are not really at risk of displacing vulnerable populations, I think there is virtue in that. And so I think, these are all kind of, great points that I'm going to continue to take notes on.
Right, there was just one other thing and I'll be finished, but I did want to just follow up to what Cheryl was saying, because I think the best way to discuss the historic district which is already mapped out and would be quite easy to also provide, is that it's a significant area along the trolley is a national historic district with the homes, roughly 250 years old. So that is a question, and I think that's what they need to see. Again, it's the challenges for Milton. This is what we have. If you have 250-year-old properties, do you want to start taking those down from multifamily housing?
Meredith, it's funny if you just look at the map and you look at the zoning map, and we have
And the National Register.
Well, we have 1 acre zoning, within a half a mile of Milton Station, and you look at those big parcels, and if you're trying to build houses, you're like, and it's like, wait, no, I don't think that we should do that, for all the obvious reasons that you're talking about. So that's the other thing where, someone may come in from the outside and say, look, Milton, you can't have your cake and eat it too. And I think that there's a way for us to figure out how to do this that really accomplishes all of the goals that we've been talking about in terms of conservation, in terms of historic preservation, affordability. The whole point of the whole thing is if you give us the flexibility, we will work with it and figure it out.
And the last thing, one last final thing, sorry. But, I think we're seeing housing reaching such a value in town that I'm worried, especially, when you look at East Milton, that we could start displacing our commercial areas with residential housing. And I'll just use the example. I think years ago before I came on the board, when Fallon Ambulance, it was up for debate what was going to happen with Fallon Ambulance. And I know John Cronin fought hard to keep where Steel and Rye is, not to be a multifamily housing. And I think of, what we would have lost if we didn't have Steel and Rye. It's just a great restaurant. It's fed people through the pandemic. It's a gathering place. Are we going to lose opportunities for restaurants, for our, really our commercial base, because it's going to lose out to housing, because that's obviously, a great need that we have as well. And that would have been a great opportunity. Probably somebody would have said that should have been, a mid-rise or 4 or 5 stories there. But I do think, we want to hold on to our commercial base, and we have to be really careful too in zoning and thinking about how we protect our commercial structures. That's it.
Okay, Kathleen?
I just wanted to say that, as you know, I'm drafting my own letter because I was on the Governor Romney's task force for 40B. I was on the task force that developed 40R. So I'm sending in my own letter from my own, letterhead, not as a member of the planning board, but I am discussing the impact of these MBTA regulations on Milton in particular, because I know from my experience that Milton is tough because, as we've said, as Cheryl said, and as Meredith and Denny have all said, half of the potential district is in the city of Boston, which isn't subject to the MBTA Communities Act because they don't have 40A. So they're not an MBTA community. They have their own zoning code, so they're out of this. And so we can't sort of tag on if we were with another MBTA community next to us, like Canton or Braintree, you could work on something together, but we don't have that ability. And the second thing is that, as everybody knows, it runs by the river and runs by land owned by DCR. I would point out that when the guidelines were issued, and they're only still the drafts, they do talk about developable area, and they do exclude areas that are wetlands, water bodies, all that sort of, those kinds of properties are excluded from what you calculate as your developable area. And going to Denny's point, they do talk about the fact that they are supposed to be following the Commonwealth Sustainable Development Principles, as we have on the DHCD's website, as they're modified from time to time. So those two characteristics are also in when you submit your information about your potential districts. Those are the things that you're supposed to be considering. The zoning doesn't outlaw or get you a pass on the town's rules and regulations with respect to historic districts and historic properties. I mean, this doesn't sort of get rid of our demolition delay bylaw. It doesn't get rid of any other bylaws that we have. It's strictly zoning. So it's going to be impacted by the other rules and regulations that we have in town. I mean, I think going to Meredith's point about the fact that, you'd hate to see something torn down in the limited commercial areas that we have. You'd hate to see something say, oh yeah, I'm going to turn down the only office building within, 7 miles to put in, multifamily housing. I think, that just sort of defeats the purpose. My concern about this is, I mean, the statute is 5 lines, it's 8 lines long. It doesn't say very much, but I think that going to Cheryl's point too, and other people's, is that, we have this whole 40R smart growth zoning. And why can't those parcels that would count as an eligible location, which has already been defined by DHCD any number of times, count as areas that we could put in for our MBTA communities? And I think there is language in the DHCD guidelines that talks about, a community making a case for sort of special considerations. And perhaps, having more flexibility in which DHCD is going to be determining would help with our situation. And I would like to have an ability to say, okay, fine. Yes, we are defined as a subway train community, but unlike other towns where it's running through the center of town or it's running through other retail and commercial areas, ours running along a river, which is going to get cleaned up by the EPA. It's a hazardous waste site right now. So it really impacts the areas that we have available for development. So I would like to see that we would be able to tag on things that are on bus lines. And that meets the DHCD's requirements. I mean, they have busing communities. It's not only just subways and trains. There's also a requirement for people, towns that just only have buses. And so why can't we sort of get the benefit of that as well? It doesn't seem to me that it should be exclusive. Like if you're one category, you can't be the other category. And so that's sort of, my thoughts on Tim's letter is great. I think it's really terrific. I hope the select board supports it. I hope we support it as well. I know that there's a lot of talk in the real estate world about the impact of this MBTA communities, and what some towns have said, well, we don't care. We're never getting any money anyway. And so we're not going to bother. That's been said in any number of places. And the sense of it is that DHCD will expand the number of programs that you won't qualify for if you don't do this zoning. So there's heat on both sides, as you can well imagine, since that seems to be the way things go these days. But I think if we can provide, as Tim letters suggest, really excellent comments about the sort of special considerations for this town to DHCD, I think that would help them if they get enough other letters from cities and towns saying, hi, we'd like to do this, but we got A, B, C, and D as our problem, like not enough water or not enough sewer or all kinds of things like that, that DHCD will then have to introduce some flexibility into these guidelines.
Okay, Cheryl?
Yeah, I just want to come back to the affordability piece and the low density that Tim spoke about. We've talked about in the context of the 40Bs, the fact that if the town were able to help produce affordable units, whether it's through town-owned property or through CPA funds or other kinds of funding, that it would get us out of or help to get us out of our 40B challenge. I know some people think that with all of the 40Bs that are pending, that's going to get us out of the challenge. However, those are going to be ongoing. There's going to be, as I've already started on the Blue Hill Ave one, legal challenges, and I anticipate there'll be legal challenges on others as well. So we're not going to be out of the 40B, a sort of threat, if you will. I'm not sure threat's the right word, but sort of challenge, 40B challenge, if you will, for a long time, in my view. And if we're talking about historic preservation and larger lots, we know that 582 Blue Hill Ave, the Blue Hills Parkway site, the Canton Ave sites, those were historic properties as well. And they're getting blown up by these really overscaled 40Bs. So we have to make sure that we are, if we're going to do this, where it's going to increase the denominator, that the town through the select board and perhaps through zoning really thinks about how to create those affordable units, finding places that those affordable units can be built. Because otherwise it's just going to be the luck of the draw where a developer finds a property that they think they can do this kind of blow up. And it's really unfortunate, for the people who live in those areas that they have no control over whether they're the ones or it'll be somebody else, their neighbors. So I think we have to be thoughtful all around. And when we're talking about this MBTA community, we can't ignore the affordability piece of it as well.
Thank you. So I thought that Kathleen mentioned an interesting point that, other towns might be saying we don't have, we don't have the right water system or, do we have a sense of any infrastructure issues that we would have if we put that level of density into the areas where you are thinking about putting density? Do we have any sense of the age of the sewer systems and their capacity and, those kind of things, the roadways, and et cetera? It might be worth kind of doing an assessment to include that, so that just to give DHCD a heads up of these are the types of challenges that we would forecast.
Yeah, I mean, I think between now and the comment period deadline, I'm not sure if that kind of full assessment would be able to be done. I mean, we can certainly talk to engineering and DPW about, I think, this part of town, the sort of older developed part of town, tends to be, pretty good on those things, at least in terms of capacity. That's as far over my skis as I'm going to go. But I think the value in that becomes, okay, whatever the final guidelines come down and we know exactly what we're going to be asked to do, I think that becomes another input and another data point about, what are the trade-offs to doing, one, 700-foot tower that takes care of everything, which again, no one's laughing. We're not going to do that. I'm not going to say. But the trade-off between doing that and doing a bunch of 3-family buildings is what is the capacity of the infrastructure, and what is our capacity and appetite for upgrading that if we need to. So I think we can definitely check in with DPW about are there anything that's kind of jumping out at them in terms of condition of the infrastructure and the capacity of it. But I think that fuller analysis, is going to better inform the actual kind of final product that it does. But we can certainly check in with them beforehand.
Right. I had one other thought. I can understand the idea of trying to think of like other micro zones we could put in other places in town than this mandated area. I do want to mention that I did get a couple of calls when the idea of bus routes came up, because that would sort of open the zoning up to the whole town in a way, because you have bus routes going all through the major routes of town. So I think people got nervous, like, well, wait a minute, because it's kind of scary to imagine it in an area, but when you say, oh, well, we could do this everywhere in town, that people said, so it just got a little bit overwhelming. But I think if you might have some specific ideas that just make a lot of sense, that would be helpful. But anyway, just wanted to.
Yeah, I mean, and the thing about that, and I'm not going to put Meredith on the spot, but she's the one that lives in the MBTA community zone. But like I think there is, and Cheryl talks about this, on occasion when we talk about zoning efforts. That, especially when it comes to like 40B, for instance, those are highly localized impacts that would be better kind of if we're going to have this sort of thing. We should spread it around, in a way that, is a lesser impact on everybody, but impacts everybody in some way. But Charlotte doesn't exactly put it that way, but I think the principle is the same, where like, there is virtue in that, in making sure that, if you see these as negative impacts in some way, that they're not just highly localized on folks that, happen to live in a certain place. Now those folks do have that amenity that they've been able to take advantage of that folks maybe up Randolph Ave haven't. But, the thing about the bus routes is, there are certain places that I think would probably be better than others. The stretch of 28, from Chickatawba Road up to Reedsdale there's a lot of big pieces of land there, but also, I mean, we see this, the argument in the 40B project, both on 711, and I think we're starting to hear it on 728 is, getting onto Randolph Ave, getting off of Randolph Ave, at the peak hour is difficult, and off the peak hour is dangerous. So I'm actually wondering how much, it is a bus route, the 240 goes up that route. I'm wondering how much we want to encourage dense development over there. It's an open question. I think there are ways to do it right, but also there are places where it may be more appropriate. But again, those bus routes go all through town. So I think there are options.
Yeah, but there I would argue back to the state that they put speed limits on those routes so that they can get people moving through Milton as fast as they can. And they should reduce the speed limits there and have that be where people can live and get people off of those roads and onto the highway to get their commuting in.
Yeah.
This is a discussion that they need to, it all ties together. They can't isolate housing from transportation, from open space, from historic. So I would absolutely, put that in part of our comment, it's, the speeds are, look, there was a fatal accident just this week, and its speed was a factor in that, and we see the accidents at Chickatawba. It has a lot to do with the safety of that intersection, but there's also a lot to do with speed on Randolph Ave. And, and even looking at Reedsdale, how far it is to cross. I mean, there's for a pedestrian, for example, you know? So anyway, I wouldn't say that we shouldn't push back on that, that we
Yeah, no,
automatically exclude Randolph, because it does have large parcels.
Yeah, I'm right there with you, Cheryl. 100%. I guess the thing that I'm saying is, you know, if when we talk about chicken and egg, I'd be much more comfortable if the chicken of the state laid an egg of a safe roadway before we start putting apartment buildings there. To torture a metaphor, but I'm with you 100%
I think we should
on
make
that.
that comment.
Yeah.
That should be one of the comments,
Yeah,
that they
and-
can't do this and not think about the other factors.
No, absolutely. I think I just wrote that note down, so I think that's
Okay. Well, thank you everyone for a spirited discussion on.
So just let me real quick, is it, I don't want to, I want to make sure I get this to the select board in time for their next meeting. So can I kind of draft up some of these and just sort of run them? I mean, do we want to maybe, I think the 24th might be too late, but also like if you kind of, how much do you trust me to do a good job of paying this
I
out?
trust you implicitly to do a good job. Because
So
you already
I'll-
have done a good job.
No,
So,
I
yeah.
appreciate that. I just, so, we're talking about, sort of, disincentivizing the destruction of historic properties or incentivizing their preservation somehow. The preservation of trees, landscape, concerns about runoff and environmental impacts on the Ponce River Brook. These are two factors that feed into, some type of relief on the location of districts. The significant portion of the area that's parks, open space, conservation land, to Kathleen's point, that gets kind of taken into account. We want to at least do a check-in on what a kind of first blush impact on our infrastructure would be. And then I think the final thing, Cheryl's point about, the state's obligation to make their highway corridors more livable and appropriate for residential development. I think Rich has his hand up too.
Yes.
Yeah.
Rick.
No, just a quick comment, because it sounds like, because I agree with what you were just, paraphrase, just cut it way down to a couple sentences here, that you're looking to say, we can't do it here, allow us to open it up a bit into different areas. I like that you said the bus routes, because it does open it up to the rest of the town, and then you can do something more, you can put more thought into the way it ends up. The only thing, only because I forget how you wrote it, but you had it flashed on the screen and you talked about East Milton. It sounds like you're giving an example, which is fine. But the only thing I would say is be careful, because what you just said was opening it up to other bus routes in the town so that we can have a good conversation before making it a thing. But your example is just East Milton. And so I would say work on the language a bit so that it's more like what you were just talking about, rather than just giving that one example.
Sure. And I definitely appreciate that, Rich. I mean, the reason I used it as an example is because it kind of fits in very specifically to another kind of state program in ways that other areas on kind of bus routes wouldn't. But I definitely, I hear you on that, just in terms of not necessarily signaling out, a particular, place, but it's other places in town don't have as much stuff as East Milton, and again, if the mandate's going to come down to, where are you going to put density, just based on the Commonwealth's own kind of, regulations and laws, those are the types of places that they're looking for from a smart growth perspective. Now, that being said, transit orientation is still a thing. Bus is still transit. I take the 240 every day. So that's not to say that there aren't areas in town that are not transit oriented and we can't do,
Well, it takes some work, like what you and Cheryl and others were just talking about Randolph Ave. So if you say, hey, let's put it here because it's ready for it, you're never going to redevelop an area like this. So Randolph Ave, I lived on Randolph Ave for 9 years. And, there was points where I was like, no, I don't want to see a big shopping center go across the street. But the reality is I mean, my dog ran out up right up the middle of Randolph Ave once, and thankfully she didn't get crushed. The buses stopped right in front of her. But the reality is, if you do redevelop that, you're going to slow traffic down. You're going to put more things there. Maybe you can put some lights there. Maybe you can change the shape of the roads. I don't know what you can do, but that all takes work. And so I'm just saying that folks, I mean, I'm not going to be on this board long enough to make that happen, but that takes a lot of planning. And to get there, you've got to make some incremental changes. And so I hope we start looking at that stuff.
So Rich, I just want to point out that since that's a state roadway, that's why I said we need to make sure that we comment back to the state on it, because we can't do things there. We can only ask the state to do things there.
Things change when people take up the fight. When you get the right politicians in, you get the right people having those discussions, things do change. It's an awful road. People are getting killed there all the time. I'm sure it wouldn't be that difficult to start doing some planning there on what could happen. And as somebody that lived there, if I still live there, I would have loved to have seen some changes going on, because it's an awful street that you're afraid to walk down. It's a great street, but you're afraid to walk down it because of the 60 miles an hour right next to you. I mean, my daughter was learning how to ride a bike during that period of my life, and it scared the crap out of me.
Oh man, yeah,
When
absolutely.
she was reaching up those sidewalks.
So I will draw up some additional comments on behalf of the board, and see if ask the select board if they'll pick them up. I don't think there's anything necessarily prevents the planning board from sending their own comment letter if they want. So, there's time to sort of consider that. I do think these are all good comments. I hope that the select board kind of takes them under advisement. So I'll keep you posted on that, as the deadline approaches.
Okay, and just to refresh our memory, my understanding is that would each of these micro zones and zones go through the town meeting process? Would they each be like these proposals, kind of like an overlay or something like that? Or
Yeah, I mean, you have to. It's zoning, so it goes through town meeting, and it's got to go through at the same time, based on the timeline, because again, it's got to add up to at least 50 acres and it's got to meet all the other requirements. There's nothing to say that you couldn't go out later and increase the number or the size or whatever. But, as the guidelines stand right now, there's a deadline of December 31st, 2023 to have the zoning district approved that meets all of these requirements. So, if we're going to have multiple sub-districts or multiple overlays, they'd probably all have to go in as a package, because they would have to meet all of the requirements.
Okay.
Tim, when do you think we're going to get guidelines? Like
They said, they're going to take everyone's comments into account, and then, summertime, we would have final guidance. I have literally no insight into what's going on at DHCD. There's no palace intrigue that kind of leaks out. But just based on what I've been hearing from other communities, other planners, I kind of think that the timelines, that may be like a real kind of easy thing for them to say, okay, we're going to increase the timelines to give folks a little more time to, figure these things out. Because it is, it's tight. We all know how tough it is to pass zoning. And this is the biggest thing that a lot of communities have ever done. And so, that would seem to me as a real easy kind of bone to throw to a lot of communities. And especially if, they take their time on final guidance. Not that they're kind of, dragging their feet intentionally or anything. They would never, but it does. They are going to get a lot of comments from a lot of communities, a lot of advocacy groups on kind of every side of this issue. So there's going to be a lot of them to take into account. And so, they say summertime. I'm sure there's a reason why they didn't give an exact date, because I know they're going to get deluged. So, yeah, once that comment period, ends. And until we get kind of further guidance, it is a little bit of a holding pattern. It kind of, it sucks to say that, but there's not a ton to do until like what the final numbers are going to be and what any relief or flexibility might wind up being. I think we should kind of figure out ways to kind of prep ourselves for having this conversation, but I don't want to go down any road too far that is going to wind up being foreclosed by some change in the final guidelines.
Okay, well, thank you. So on to our next agenda item. The discussion of the March special town meeting articles. We had that on our agenda for Mr. Corcoran, and Steve Kelleher had provided some friendly amendments. Could we welcome Mr. Kelleher into the panelists? Excellent. Good evening, Mr. Corcoran and Mr. Kelleher. Good evening.
Good evening once again.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Good evening, Mr. Kelleher. Thank you for joining us.
You're welcome.
Okay, and thank you for your thoughtful, your thoughtful description and your thoughtful suggestions. I thought I would let Mr. Corcoran walk through his thoughts. I'm assuming the planning board has got a chance to read them. So, Mr. Corcoran.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First of all, let me say thank you to Steve. I appreciate the fact that someone has taken the time to read through the zoning carefully and to look at it, because quite often we get to town meeting and these questions kind of arise on the floor. People haven't really looked at it. They haven't thought about it. And so I do appreciate that. For the most part, I think what you're proposing is appropriate. I mean, there are technical issues, I guess, whether dark sky compliant should be capitalized or not capitalized. I know it's a technical term. Maybe it should be capitalized. I'll leave that to the board. We do have two concerns with the first of the two amendments that you proposed. This is memory care, assisted living is a fairly heavily regulated industry in the Commonwealth. So a lot of what needs to be done here, it needs to comply with not just zoning, but also other regulations. With respect to the issue of full-time residents, regulations require residency of certain lengths in time, but there are two examples where a handful of units would have to be available or need to be available for something other than full-time. And that is, first you may have couples in town where perhaps the husband has some memory care issues, but is still able to live at home with the wife. They have other care available, but then something happens with the wife. Maybe she needs surgery, something where she needs ability to recuperate without having the burden of taking care of the husband with the memory care issue. The idea is that a couple of beds would be available for what they call respite care, so that if someone needed for a short-term period to have access to the memory care facility, it might be available for that purpose. And it would serve the purpose of providing memory care service, but it would only do it on a shorter-term basis rather than a so-called full-time. The other area where a bed or two is going to be necessary is that given the proximity to the hospital does get in the emergency room occasionally they get folks with memory care who present in the emergency room. The hospital's not set up to handle memory care issues on a full-time basis. They will have a relationship with this facility so that if they need access to someone with memory care expertise, that person's available across the street, and they might need a bed for a couple of nights rather than place them in a room within the hospital itself. They can place them across the street in a memory care facility where they'll have access to people who are trained to provide memory care services. So for those two reasons, we really would object to the notion of full-time residents, but it's clear that under state regulations, these are residential units that are available substantially for full-time, but also as necessary and occasionally for other purposes. So I would request that amendment not be accepted, but left as it is.
Ned, I liked the language that you just said, essentially for full-time, but occasionally. Is that something that you would entertain possibly proposing
You know, my only other issue with that, Danny, really deals with this, with the notion of what's required under the state regulations, because zoning ought not to not conflict with what is otherwise required under state regulation. It is a heavily regulated industry. The intent is clearly, the clear intent is 70 units, 78 beds, memory care, special care only, not general assisted living. I know there are particular impacts and concerns that we dealt with throughout the process of developing this language around concerns for traffic and other impacts associated with you know, a standard assisted living. Many of the quote unquote residents still drive. They need assistance with some of the elements of day-to-day living. But they're not contained. They're not, so memory care, everybody's there, they're contained, they don't drive. So the traffic implications go away. And so I hesitate to try to parse language that may run afoul of what otherwise is required by state regulation. And so I understand the intent, I appreciate the intent,
Okay.
I think, anyway, that's our position on that, and I would really ask Steve to reconsider that amendment based on this argument.
Okay. Before you jump into the next point,
Sure.
I wanted to open that up to discussion. I didn't know if Steve wanted to hear the thoughts of the planning board first, or if Steve wanted to tell us his thoughts first. I leave it up to you, Mr. Kelleher. Would you?
I think it was helpful hearing Ned's the background on this, but I'd definitely like to hear the background on the planning board, just to hear their comments.
Okay, great. And you're welcome to comment as well. Okay, did any of the planning board members have any thoughts about what Mr. Corcoran just reported? Because I think planning board has to determine if it's a friendly amendment or if it's not a friendly amendment. And then my understanding is that then Mr. Kelleher could go onto the town floor and he could still make it. It just wouldn't be a friendly amendment, or we could come up with different language that could possibly be friendly. So go ahead, Kathleen.
I think most of the changes that Steve, as Nick said, were fine, and I don't have an issue with them, but I do think that our zoning shouldn't be putting in a requirement that is in violation of whatever the requirements are for the licensing by the state. So while I'm in favor of, whatever the changes are that are acceptable to Ned, I'm fine with. I don't really want to be in a situation where I put in something that the state's not going to approve.
Okay. All right, Cheryl, was your hand up?
Yeah, I agree with Kathleen. I just wanted to add on the accessibility. There's state law and federal law related to accessibility requirements. And I think adding it to zoning would just be confusing. It's already confusing between state and federal, because federal is the ADA and it's a civil rights legislation, and the state, it has their own, and they're not in sync completely. And there's lots of discussion in the architectural community about that. What do you design to? You're required to design to codes, which is the state law. But then what happens if that's in conflict with ADA? So and that applies to number of units as well. So these facilities, the requirements for accessibility are by facility type as well. So it's not the same for office buildings as it is for housing, as it is for assisted living. So I think we should leave it to the regulations that already cover that, rather than adding another layer for accessibility.
Okay, we do say in the zoning that it's ADA compliant, don't we say that somewhere, or it follows other guidelines and laws? Or
Yeah.
It doesn't have to say that, because it can't get licensed if it's not.
Right, okay, but it does, I feel like it was mentioned in the zoning.
Yeah, I've always felt as if the zoning shouldn't cover things that are covered in other building codes, because there could be conflict in the zoning, and then you have to go change the zoning. Building codes are updated all the time. And if the zoning isn't keeping track, if we're not keeping track of all the building code updates, then we're gonna have to, we'll have an application that meets zoning but doesn't meet other building codes. And, that's just confusing and problematic
Yeah, it's
for
one, I
those
think
who
it's
are
one
just
thing,
trying to.
I
Sorry,
think
go
it's
ahead.
one thing to say that it must be ADA compliant because that's referring to a state regulation, and the state regulation changes from time to time. And that's something that's understood within the industry. It's another thing to say it's handicapped accessible, but what does that mean? That's a.
But Ned, ADA is actually federal civil rights legislation.
Right.
I think it's
I'm
521.
AAB,
It's,
right.
yeah, it's the Architectural Access Board regulations, which I think are 521 CMR, that are the state code.
I misspoke. But those are defined federal and state legal requirements. And it's fine to refer to those in the zoning because they change and the architectural community understands them. It's a separate thing to say something must be handicapped accessible or be available for full-time residents. When those are not defined terms, they're not clearly understood. But they create confusion between what the zoning requires and what you are otherwise absolutely required to do in accordance with the state permits and the building permits that you get before you are able to go forward. So, I mean, this building, when it's built, will be accessible. It will be required to be accessible. Every unit will be somewhat different because they'll meet different needs of different folks. So the accessibility.
I would just add to what Ned said, in terms of residential development, the requirements for individual residential units, it's not required that every unit be handicapped accessible because it does affect kitchen counter construction, it affects bathroom construction, it affects clearances, so the sizes of units change. And so
there's a percentage, there's a balance of how the units get developed to meet the overall requirement. If for example, every unit was to be fully accessibly, handicapped accessible, every bathroom would have to be accommodate a wheelchair.
So would it be possible, I guess, to do a percentage? Say, like we said, 7.5%?
No, it's not, because the building code already describes that. And the zoning ought not to do that.
I agree with Ned on that point.
Okay, can we hear from the, I'm sorry, I'll come back to you, Cheryl, if that's okay. I was wondering if Meredith or Rich Beeler had any thoughts on this. Okay, all right, I'm sorry, go ahead, Cheryl.
I interrupted there, but I just wanted to point out that I agree with Ned on that. Mr. Kelleher's request to make it a percentage, because again, the percentage could be in conflict with state or federal law on this issue. And, changing zoning requires time because it goes back to town meeting and requires two-thirds the vote of town meeting. And I have been consistent in my time on the board not to want to put things in zoning that are covered elsewhere in the laws. And I feel like this one is very clearly covered elsewhere.
Okay. All right, so it sounds like, and I'll poll the rest of the board, but it sounds like, I forget how many you had. Let's say you had 7 out of 9 amendments. It sounds like 7 of them are friendly. We can go over them one at a time, I think, but most of them are friendly. But then these 2 are the sticking point. Is it, Mr. Kelleher, did you have any thoughts or any ideas on?
I appreciate both Ned's information as well as Cheryl and other board members. I mean, now that I hear it more, I mean, I'm definitely not an expert in this field, so I appreciate the feedback, but I'd be willing to remove those two amendments. I'd be willing to, based on the information shared tonight.
Okay, well, that's very flexible of you. Thank you for that. And
the other 6, I think there's a total of 8. So the other 6 are fine with us because there's no conflict with the other obligations under the state and federal law. But everything else, I don't see a problem with, and we'd be happy for the board to entertain a friendly amendment, accepting the balance as friendly amendments.
Okay, all right. So did the rest of the board agree that those were friendly amendments?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, okay.
Jenny, I just had a question because I just was reviewing those during our conversation here in the folder that's in our shared drive folder. And I didn't see something referring to the dark sky. So is there something that I missed that's not in that amendment folder?
Let me quickly
Or
look.
could we get those amendments up on the screen so we can just be clear what we're agreeing to?
Sure. Yeah, it's
Number 5.
number 5, and it refers to section 11, and it was just doing lowercase dark sky compliant. It's a minor
Yeah, so
change.
I disagree with that change because dark sky is actually, and maybe it really shouldn't be dark sky blank. There might be another word that I think might be missing, but it is a defined term in the sense that it is an organization that promulgates those regulations. And we've got that defined somewhere else in our zoning.
I did look and I couldn't find it again, but I'm not an expert looking through the zoning, but
Yeah, well,
Well,
yeah.
reading our zoning
Zoning
code
is
is a pretty
confusing.
horrible experience. I would recommend it to anybody.
Cheryl, we come across this quite a bit, and I think what it's not a defined term in the zoning, but International Dark Sky Association and their standards are a thing. So it may make sense to maybe change that to compliant with the standards of the International Dark Sky Association or similar standard. Something.
That's what we normally have done, and yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
I know that the Walcott Woods zoning says dark sky compliant. It's how it's been used elsewhere, but if there's a more technically correct way to say it, then certainly we should say it that way.
Yeah, I think maybe it's been in our special permits where we've been more specific than maybe that zoning, but.
I have seen it as dark sky compliant multiple times. I mean, do we as a planning board want to come up with a friendly amendment to our own article at this point, or do we just want to stick with, I mean, this would be consistent with a number of other projects, as Mr. Corcoran has said.
I think it's close enough to what we would put in that I wouldn't bother doing another amendment for that.
Well, my point would be, how does one judge whether it's dark sky compliant if it's not defined or if it's not shown where those regs are coming from? And because it's wrong elsewhere doesn't mean it should be wrong here, in my view.
I'm sad to hear it's wrong. I thought it was right.
Are you, Cheryl, are you referring to like meaning wrong? It's like if we're going to call it the International Dark Sky Compliant, and I think it's spelled a certain way, dark with a hyphen sky, then you're naming something and you're referring to something, right?
Yeah, that's what I mean.
Yeah. So either
we
you
should
do that.
change it to be compliant with the standard, as Tim said.
Yeah.
And even though that's not the way we have it in other zoning, I think it's better because then when somebody applies for under this zoning, they know specifically what they need to be compliant with. Like if I'm designing this building, 6 months from now, where do I go to find that information? And then we as a board, how do we know that it's compliant with something that we can't refer to?
Well, it's dark sky, right. Yeah, makes sense.
And it's also appropriate in this case to refer to that as a requirement because it's not a building code requirement and it's not a federal or state mandate, right? It is a standard that has been recognized to make sure that lighting is installed in a way that preserves, that doesn't overlight, right? But it's not a building code requirement. It's not a state regulation. It's not a federal requirement. It's appropriate in this zoning to refer to that as a standard that has to be met in terms of for the special permit.
Well, I have a question, Tim. so these are friendly amendments that are coming from Steve. We can't get the language that you just suggested. We can't necessarily add to Steve's. We would need to do our own friendly amendment.
Could I approve it maybe? Sorry.
Thank you for offering. That's very kind of you. I just looked at this
I think,
properly.
yes, technically, I think you can do that. Steve, you could, work with Tim to define it correctly. The board could adopt that as a friendly amendment. Perhaps, at your meeting Monday before you get to town meeting, and then that's simply shown on the screen to town meeting members as a series of amendments that have been proposed by, Steve Keller and have been accepted by the planning board as friendly amendments. And so they become changes, and they should be, for purposes of town meeting on Monday night, should be shown as redlined changes to the article, to the recommendation. So somebody, presumably Julia would have to go in and make those red line changes so that when they're up on the screen, people can see that what those amendments are, where they fit within the context of the overall proposal.
So Steve, here's what I'd like to do. I would like to, so we're sort of in, because what you're going to need to do is send something to the moderator clarifying, basically saying I want to withdraw these first two things, and then I have revised language for number 5 or whatever. So what I'd like to do is take a stab at writing some language that I think is good, because I'm poking around on the dark sky site. They have a model ordinance, but we're not really talking about that. I just want to find something that is going to be clear, but also doesn't kind of bind us to things that, and as a board, I think we may want to think about, do we want to just adopt their model lighting bylaw at some point? It would be very easy for everyone else after that. But let me come up with some language. I'll shoot you an email. And if it's good, then you can kind of send off a message to the moderator that says, hey, here's some revised amendments. And I can attest to the fact that the planning board has accepted them as
Okay, that sounds great.
Okay, so Tim, I will give Mr. Hiss an update tomorrow because he asked for it by Friday. So I will tell him that we are changing the dark sky compliant term, and we will vote on that on Monday. Or we will just go ahead. Can we just give you the authority to do it?
Yeah, I'm not going to go crazy. And you can just let them know kind of the gist. We'll have exact language maybe closer to the end of the day or over the weekend, depending on how fast I can kind of get this out the door. But if you want, you can give him, the gist basically, which I think is in the spirit of his request to get these things by the Friday before town meeting.
Okay, thank you.
Because one way or the other, we're going to have to work with the warrant committee on Monday to kind of get that red line together and everything.
Okay, and thank you, Mr. Kelleher, for working with us. It's really exciting, the planning board working with the citizens. So this is good.
And on behalf of Northbridge and Hospital, Steve, thank you. I really appreciate the fact that you dug into it, you asked good questions, and you were thoughtful in how you were paying attention.
You're welcome.
And your whole approach was excellent. But before I let anybody go, did anybody else have any other thoughts on these other amendments? They all seemed excellent to me. I'm just taking a quick.
That's fine.
Okay.
I'm sorry. Could I get Mr. Keller's address, please?
It's 93 Nancy Road.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. All right. Do we need to do any votes or anything? We're all good. Right?
Yep.
So we've determined that these are friendly amendments. Do we need a vote to accept?
You should probably
Yeah,
vote on
might
it.
as well.
Yeah. Okay. Kathleen,
I
you
would
want
ask you to do that.
I
sure-
would make a motion to approve the friendly amendments as modified by Mr. Kelleher and the board.
Excellent. Thank you. And we have a second. Okay. Rich Beeler,
Yes.
Ms. Hall,
Yes.
Ms. O'Donnell,
Yes.
Mr. Gaius,
Yes.
Denny Swenson, yes. Excellent. That's wonderful news. We have all friendly amendments.
Thank you all.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Keller. We'll see you on Monday.
Sounds good.
Great. Have a great weekend.
Thank you, you too. Okay, so we have our last item of the agenda. And it is 9:23. Okay, 440 Granite Avenue. Okay. So we have received a letter from Ms. McKettrick stating that her client would like to withdraw the application before us, site plan approval application before us. So we could open this up to discussion.
So I would actually like to open the discussion.
Okay.
If I could.
Yes.
Am I on? No, I'm muted. Because before we start discussing this withdrawal, which obviously I think we'll all have to accept, but I would respectfully would like to make a motion that we formally acknowledge as a board the site plan approval conditions as deliberated and voted on in our most recent meetings. I think this will be it is important that we do this for the public and particularly for the East Milton residents that have repeatedly attended public hearings, written many letters regarding this project over the last year. We have sat through,
12.
12 public hearings. We have really spent a great deal of time on this. And in my mind, we were at the finish line. We were finalizing, our list of conditions for site plan approval. And we respectfully stepped back because the applicant had a family emergency. And I think we absolutely did the right thing in pausing because of that. But we essentially had closed the public hearing. We had completed our work for the most part, except for, dotting our I's and crossing our T's. And I just for the public, I think it's really important that for the public and for the process that it is acknowledged where we were at the point before the withdrawal. So I would make a motion, a respectful motion that we formally acknowledge as a board the site plan approval conditions as deliberated and voted on in our most recent meetings.
All right. Okay. Did anyone want a second? Do we want to talk about this?
Sure.
You would like to talk about it, Rich?
No, I can talk about it, but I'll second it too. I mean, it sounds like it makes sense. I'm not sure, like, what it,
I don't think we can legally do it.
okay.
If
don't
you
know what the
withdraw
legal-
the application, there's
They-
nothing to vote on.
Well, they can withdraw the application right after we do that. Right
We
after
have
They
not-
withdraw the application, they don't have to get our permission to withdraw the application.
They don't have to get our permission, but we're going to give them our permission right away, immediately after
Well,
anyway.
yeah, but I
No, we're
mean,
not-
but if they,
We're not saying that we won't give them permission. We're saying that we want to publicly, formally put in public record what our conditions were at the time that they
but
decided.
we can't be doing that for something that isn't before us. There's no jurisdiction anymore.
We've already voted on these items. We voted on these
But
items.
there's no
No.
jurisdiction for it because they're no longer before us.
Are they recorded in the meeting minutes as votes?
Yeah,
Yes.
Then
Absolutely.
they're already
So
on
they're
the,
there.
they're already in the record then.
It's not as one document. It was sort of being put into one document, and that's where we were, that we had, it was a couple of meetings that we had gone through. And if you remember, we actually, because we were really working hard to really
Oh,
give
I
them a vote
totally
as soon as
understand it.
possible. And we deliberated, if you remember, that was our midnight, we stayed until midnight working to get that done on,
no, I didn't
for
remember
that.
that.
and
Well,
I,
we only didn't vote because we ran out of time.
Yeah,
Yeah,
well,
exactly.
it was another day.
it was midnight. And so I just want to have our complete list of conditions. And it's already, part and parcel in public record, but I think as one document, it's just, it's important to have it.
Well, I
Well,
have
I
to
guess
read them
I would-
again before I would even think about it. It's been
I need-
Yeah, so many
Sorry,
things that
Jesse.
we've done since then. I can't remember what all of them, I remember the bollards and some other stuff, but I don't really remember all of them.
That was Falcone. That was actually not.
I'd actually like an opinion of town council on what,
Yeah,
I mean, what bearing this has on the site plan approval. I mean, is this applicant, as far as I read the letter, wants to withdraw without prejudice and go to the zoning board of appeals. And to me, that's appropriate because when we started the process, we started the hearing, Tim said to us that we should treat it as if it was an as of right, or it had already received zoning variances, because that's the way site plan approval normally works. And so I guess it's this idea of going to both boards or going to the planning board in advance. That has worked on the 2 or 3 times that I've been on the board where it's done that, where it maybe wasn't as complicated or as big a project, or the issues weren't as maybe complex, where they kind of went hand in hand. But I think it's much cleaner that we as a planning board know what the Board of Appeals grants them on these variances before we pick up the site plan approval. And so I
can't put the genie back in the bottle. You can't all of a sudden just say that these things weren't discussed and that we could not, have conditions. So yes, we were asked to give our conditions. Marion presented us a letter, even with her own conditions, and we voted and we agreed as a board on all but 3 of the conditions. We were pretty, together, and Marion gave us a document giving us an opportunity for conditions. We used some of hers and we added some of our own. And I just want to memorialize the fact that we were at the end of the process. We were literally at the end of the process. And I just, for the public record and for all of the members and the residents who for a year came to took their evening, never mind our time, but it was the time of the residents. And I think it's really unfair that all of that work and all of that process not be recognized. And they're fine to withdraw. And without prejudice, they can withdraw, but not without prejudice. And I just want for the public record to know that what we have. And
I again would like a legal opinion
Yeah.
about the without
Yeah.
prejudice. I don't really understand what the implications are, and I'd rather not take a vote on something that I don't understand the implications on. Because
site plan approval doesn't have a specific handbook. There's no rule that's saying that we've already voted on this. We've actually already voted on these items.
if the
No.
application is being withdrawn, they could come back to us with a totally different project with a totally different set of parameters, and the conditions would be
And that
meaningless.
would be fine.
Well,
and that's
Conditions
fine.
are meaningless.
It's recognizing the conditions that we've already in the past, when we were in process with them, voted on. So
All right, then if you're not willing to get an opinion of town council, let's ask our town planner what he thinks about whether we have what this means in terms of a vote. I don't really know what it means.
I'm fine with waiting. But
I don't think anyone has said that we're not fine getting town council's opinion on this. I just, and I'm happy to hear from Tim in a moment. I just wanted to say that I can hear why, and I can fully understand why Meredith would like to memorialize all the work that we have done for this past year on this. I mean, we did agonize over, getting conditions right. And I spent a great deal of time writing that whole finalized document with everybody's input. And the idea that all that communication and all that work and we came to, and we did come to full consensus on all but 3, and there we had a majority. All that understanding that was gleaned from the public to come to those conditions, the idea that just gets lost. I understand an applicant can withdraw, and that's fine. You know, the public has watched and participated in great number, and I can understand for their sake, sort of memorializing these conditions as a public document, as a starting point to pick up on this discussion where we left off. When they do come back, we don't want, you know, to have to start all over again. Like we have had these discussions and they were hard and long, and like we went late into the night, and it was a tough project. So, but if you know, I'm interested to hear from Rich, and if Rich, you know, wants, I will go back to town council and we can pick this up at another time, and carry on.
Yeah, I mean, I'm fine with that. Asking town council, I agree with the comments. I mean, regardless of where it's written, I mean, I've still got another year on the board. I'm not going to forget what we put in the time into it. I don't know what the applicant's doing. I'm imagining they're going to change something, and I would hope they're just not going to the ZBA with the exact same thing with hopes of getting a better answer, because, you know, it is going to eventually come back to us. You know, so yeah, I agree with comments.
Okay. So
So just doing a quick look at the zoning code, we don't have some other zoning codes that I've seen. This might be a future comment for discussion. Have a process for withdrawal where if you want to withdraw, you have to get 3 votes of a planning board to approve it. We don't have that. You can just withdraw. So I'm not seeing anything. Of course, our zoning code, you know, I haven't read all, you know, soup to nuts, but I'm looking at the pages that talk about site plan approval, and we don't have any clauses in here about what, you know, what process you have to go through. I think you just send a letter and your application's gone.
But
So-
don't you, Kathleen, I mean, again, I'm not a lawyer, you're a lawyer.
There you go.
If for what Meredith is saying, it sounds at the most basic, it's just saying, yes, we did something and it's going into some notes. The reality is it doesn't do anything to anybody. I mean, it's probably more making us feel better, and making the folks that did come out in droves to speak on behalf of this, that we heard and we listened to them, and that, you know, if this comes back to us in 3 months from now, we're not going to act like nobody ever showed up and talked to us.
I totally agree, and I agree with Meredith. I mean, you know, there's a lot of work that was done. It's just that you know, unfortunately, you know, stupid lawyers, we always are like, wait a minute, where's the jurisdiction? And so if there's some sort of memo that we want to put together and have it in the record, to say that, you know, we did discuss this and sort of memorialize, as Meredith and Denny have pointed out, that memorialize the things that we talked about. So when there's a new planning board, they can come and take a look at what we did and sort of use that for their guidance. That's fine. But as I said, I don't remember all the things that we thought we were going to do. So I wouldn't be voting tonight to say, sure, yeah, let's vote on that, because I'd like to see what we want to put in.
Okay, so that's good. I unfortunately remember very well what we did, because I wrote down every single condition that we had voted on, and I put it in that document, and it was in that document. So we had voted on every single condition. All I wanted to do was just run it by town council, and that was it. And town council was looking at it, and then the applicant asked us to hit pause, but we had already on everything. But what I wanted to do was just leave us that ability to say, you know, town council suggests we change this or tweak that, and then we're, you know, so I left it open for town council to make an adjustment, but nothing else.
As I said, that's fine, but before we take a vote, if we take a vote on it tonight, I mean, I just don't want to take a vote on it tonight, because I'd like to sort of read it through again and say, oh yeah, right. I remember this part, the trees and the this and the that, you know, I do remember that, but,
okay, fair enough. Okay.
But it was almost midnight, so.
Well, you know, there's been a lot going on, you know, so, you know, it's sort of hard to remember. And I just would like to refresh my recollection, as lawyers always say when they go to court, is refresh my recollection as to what we agreed to. So,
Well, to make you feel a little bit better, I counted up, we've had 24 meetings in fiscal year 2022. And we had 19 meetings in fiscal year 2020 for the whole year. We still have 5 months to go. So we've had more meetings in a half a year.
I may be reconsidering that, application to run again. Is it too late to pull my name?
And in fiscal year 2021, we had 38 meetings, which was
Yeah.
double what we had the year before. So we have been having way too many meetings. So if you don't remember something, I completely forgive you. But I did.
Thank you.
We had
You've got
12 meetings on this topic alone, and it's been, and this is our 13th. So.
You're gonna have to tell me. It's weird that you came on after me, and you get to leave before. So.
There's something not fair about that. Yeah.
Something weird about that.
So I would move to move this discussion to our next meeting then, following.
Okay.
Following review of the conditions, opportunity to review conditions and.
Okay, I just wanted.
I would still like to hear from Tim.
Tim wants to say something.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, it's tough. I do want to hear kind of what Kevin has to say about this, because I think ultimately the path that we're going to see this project go down is I think they've got a hearing date at the Board of Appeals in late May. As Shara referenced earlier, some of the less complicated projects you've been able to sort of work lockstep with the Board of Appeals, and do a site plan approval process. I think this one, and we've said it from the very beginning, I think would benefit from clarity on the zoning compliance. I said in my memo, and I said during, the public hearing, the standards by which the Board of Appeals evaluates and grants variances are much stricter than anything that's in site plan approval. And so there's got to be a real kind of demonstration of, why are we, it's not because, they can't just give a parking variance because we think it would make the site plan, better. There's got to be a legitimate, hardship that they get. Granted, the Board of Appeals, sometimes makes decisions that, maybe not everyone necessarily agrees with, but, they do have much more defined guardrails about why they grant variances. So all of that is to say, if that project is going to have a public hearing at the Board of Appeals. I know the folks that came and commented at our public hearing are probably sick and tired of it, but I suspect that they'll come out with the same vigor for that public hearing, and the Board of Appeals is going to hear about it. The Board of Appeals has tighter standards, and quite frankly, the way that public comment and kind of a butter testimony and commentary is treated by the Board of Appeals is also a little different than at the Planning Board. Not necessarily a one-for-one proxy, but there are findings that the Board of Appeals has to make regarding sort of impact to the neighborhood and derogation of the intent of the zoning bylaw, by which the testimony of abutters is a little bit different. And all of this is to say that if this project gets through the Board of Appeals with some zoning relief that they find tolerable, who knows, maybe they get through and the project that they applied for with the Planning Board gets through with all the variances that they needed. It could be that the variances that they're granted change the shape of the project in the site plan. But if this project comes back with zoning relief in hand, it's going to be really difficult for the Planning Board to impose conditions that change that. I think the unit count condition that you all approved, I think if it had gone through would have been problematic. Just because, again, that is a condition that they said would have made the project infeasible. And so I think the virtue.
I don't think we all approve the unit count.
I don't know. I'm sorry to cut you off, Tim, but I don't know that. Do we have to go through all of this right now? Because I'll be honest with you, I don't agree with you. We still have to go through site plan approval. We still have the same things we get to look at. We still can put conditions on the project. the fact that they go through the ZBA, and if the ZBA gives them whatever, does not mean that they still don't have to come through here to get our approval, because if they didn't need our approval, we wouldn't be taking a vote on it.
I guess what I'm saying, if they've got, sorry, Rich.
Yeah. No, I mean, if they don't need our approval, then I won't take part in the process, because that's where I think I don't agree with you, because we still have a piece of that process. We literally got a written note, a written memo from Kevin Freitag on what our role was in this. It still is that role. I don't see a difference.
I guess what I'm saying is, and I never meant to intimate that there's going to be no site plan approval. There's absolutely going to have to be site plan approval. What I mean is I think that if they do come back with zoning relief, the planning board can condition and regulate a project. They can't reject a site plan approval.
Correct. Same as before.
And conditions that render the project infeasible are tantamount to a rejection. Now, whether that gets challenged in court or whatever, I mean, this is all speculation. I'm just saying that the environment where this public hearing took place was a different environment than if they had come to us with zoning relief. All of this is to say that I think what I would be careful of is, and maybe Kevin will come back and say, this is all fine, do whatever. I don't want to have the board put itself in a position where its decision-making on a future application appears prejudiced by virtue of an effectively symbolic decision that they made on this withdrawn application. I 100% understand and quite frankly agree with what Meredith is proposing here. I think that it's a really crummy end to a difficult process. But I think the board needs to be very deliberate in kind of doing its duty to the public, that has been a participant in this hearing, and also not putting itself in a position where future decisions are imperiled because of some kind of, again, our attorneys may come back and say, no, this is no big deal. But that's just my kind of first kind of blush. So I do agree with the idea of let's continue this to the next meeting, and let's see what town council has to say.
Okay, if it's okay, I'm thinking the 24th, because I'm trying to keep that 17th meeting light, like a really quick meeting. The 24th is our other meeting, if that's okay with everybody.
Yeah, can I just ask one more thing in terms of town council while we're asking? If town council could provide an opinion about whether the decision as written would be defensible upon appeal, in his opinion. So it gets to the question of whether what Tim said, what town council believes about, for example, what Tim said about a condition that puts a unit count that makes something financially infeasible. I would just like to have town council's opinion about that, whether it's something he would defend, he would recommend that the select board defend in court if it were appealed.
Okay, I have one thing to say, and that is that if you memorialize all of our public hearings, and we did these conditions, and then they withdrew the application, and they put forward a new application or a different application, I mean, it's just part of the track record. Nothing has changed. All we have done is memorialize it.
Yeah, I would just like to know whether he feels it's legally defensible. That's all. Because I know in the past, planning board decisions have been appealed, by applicants. And there's times when town council has to recommend to the select board whether they defend those decisions or not. I would just like to have an idea, because it guides us better when we do get another application, because I have questions about that. And, I realize that, there's votes that I am in the minority on, but it doesn't mean my question about that isn't valid. you know, I think we all should want to know what town council thinks about that. And that's all I'm asking for.
I'll be
We might
happy
wanna
to ask that question. No, I'd be happy to ask that question, but carry on. What did you want to say, Mr. Beeler?
Oh, no, I was just gonna say, we might want to have him come because I guess, I would be very confused. And I think this is where you were going, Denny, like, because if we actually spent 5 more minutes, we would have had a vote and they would have withdrawn it, and then we'd be in the same predicament. I mean, technically, we already talked about everything. Everything really is memorialized because it's all on video. We've talked about it at length. We talked about every condition. We just didn't make a final restate it all, I guess. And so, I mean, I was okay with what you were saying, Meredith, because it makes sense. But the reality is we already had it. It's already there. It's on every video. You just have to go look at the videotape. And so that's why I would love to hear what town council would have to say, because it would be confusing to hear that it would be a problem because it's already been stated. It's already on video. We're not actually voting it in and we're not approving anything. I think Meredith was just trying to memorialize to say to the public, hey, we all spent countless hours on this. We heard you and we did write it down. Here it is. The reality is, I mean, I'll say it. I don't really care. I don't think it's going to hurt us in the future. I am going to be on the board next year. And if this was a means to just skirt a vote that they didn't like, well, I am going to have a problem with that when it comes back. And so they're going to have to do a little better than that.
Yeah. Do we know if they're changing the project or are they just taking it to the ZBA?
I don't think we have any idea. And you know, and I don't think it, you know, from a legal perspective, I don't think our vote makes any difference because the application isn't before us. So it's not like, you know, we've done something to, you know, injure them in any way. So I'm not concerned. I'm not concerned about that. I'm basically, my situation was I'm just trying to, before I took a vote, I just want to see what I'm voting on. You know, I can see asking town council and stuff like that, but if the application isn't here, anything we vote is, as Meredith and you have, Rich has said, it memorializes our thoughts on it, but it doesn't have any impact. They come in with a new application. It's like, okay, fine, it's in the record, but you know,
And they've
it's a new application.
And the reality is we don't have to look at what just because we said, hey, we never have to look.
Yeah, I mean, it's not binding. It's like, well, okay, yeah, this was my thought on this, and you know, this is what we talked about, and this is we thought would be a good, you know, good reflection of the neighbors' comments and our comments and everything else, and yeah, it's there, and people can see it.
I'm just more, at least for again the time that I'm on this board, cautioning other developers coming in, taking 12 or 13 meetings. I mean, count the hours, and then to reverse it, to take it away, and then just bring it right back. Please don't.
Well, they're not going to get through the zoning board in any big fat hurry. You'll be off the planning board before they come back.
I'm quite sure. It's going to take a while, and they're going to be there with the same types of comments and things like that. So, yeah, I get it. I would, yeah, I prefer developers not come through here unless they're willing to let us complete it.
Well,
I just want to make one comment that I don't think we should prejudge why they withdrew.
Well, I'm sorry. I wasn't done. It's my understanding on all the projects that I've been on that it goes before the ZBA and the planning board. It's usually ahead with the ZBA. So we kind of learn of the variances and both public hearings are kind of going on at the same time, or staggered in a way so that we can understand where the ZBA is going. And that's always worked in the past. And I don't understand why that didn't happen on this one. I mean, I
think the 40B's scheduling problem.
That they could have gone to ZBA. Marianne said she could have gone to ZBA, but then she never did. And now they're choosing to go to ZBA. I'm puzzled. I just want to understand that because I think that put all of us, including the applicant, who, by the way, I feel terribly for the public and I feel terribly for all of us. I also feel terribly for the applicant because the applicant just spent a year dealing with all of our agonizing meetings too. So this has been a tough situation.
Lawyer fees.
A lot of professionals' fees, lawyers' fees, architects' fees, engineers. I mean, the fees. I mean, I can't even imagine the cost of that. And I know it was hard
I
for our
agree.
staff and Tim and Allison and Julia. I mean, the hours spent on this. I would just almost like to kind of take a quick look at how did this happen so it doesn't happen to all of us again.
My comment to how it happened is, you know, we need to think about the zoning in East Milton like we talked about. But my comment before, Denny, is sorry, it's hard to see you when you're talking because you're kind of like in a fog there. But
It's a bad camera, but I'm pretending to be like Eva Gardner or somebody, but carry on.
So I didn't mean to speak over you, but what the comment I wanted to make was I don't think it's appropriate for us to judge why or to presuppose we know why they are asking for the withdrawal. You know, I know from being an architect that, you know, to totally regroup and retool and rethink a project is a big step for a developer to make because they've got, as we just said, a lot invested in where they are. And so maybe with the personal tragedy, it was an opportunity to reflect and think about whether they wanted to take some time and you know, hear from the Board of Appeal and regroup. So I really, you know, projects, I am working on projects that are taking 2 and 3 years to get through zoning and BPDA approval in Boston. It's just because you hear from the neighbors and then the developer really has to give a hard look at it. They have to look at their numbers. They have to look at what they're paying for the property. And I know a lot of people think that, you know, there's just an extraordinary amount of money in construction, but when somebody, you know, signs on the dotted line to acquire a piece of property and then you get COVID and costs of construction go through the roof and all sorts of other things come into play, it does change the numbers, and and I know this from our work. So I just wanted to make that comment.
Well, thank you. That's a really important point, that we do have to be sensitive to that. And on that note, do we have any like wrap up comments? Are we all good? It sounds like we are all in agreement. We want to put this off till the 24th. We'll wait.
What would, Denny, sorry, what would be helpful for me and Meredith, if you don't mind, maybe kind of just writing down a quick paragraph of what you're proposing. It doesn't have to be like, just I want to make sure that it's characterized to town council in the right way. And I may, you know, I'll ask him if he's available on the 24th to kind of come in and have, you know, the kind of site plan approval conversation. Because I think this is, you know, I'm going to be honest with you. I think our site plan bylaw is not the greatest. Every town in the Commonwealth has a different one, and a lot of them provide a lot better guidance to their planning boards than ours does. So, you know, this is just it puts you all in a very difficult position. And so this is a situation, especially as it relates to like withdrawal. Like, what are you supposed to do with this? So, you know, we'll see if he's available to kind of talk through.
Well, it also, you could fold it into the fact that MBTA community is going to require site plan approval that's mostly as of right. So, you know, it's an ongoing, you know, discussion, not only for this particular project, which, you know, has got its own story, but we're going to have site plan approval for anything that we propose in those MBTA communities. And we need to set up a better process than what we've got on the 3 pages that are in our zoning bylaw. And so, you know, it wouldn't be a bad idea to start to take a look and see what better examples are out there, so that when we go forward in any situation here in this town with site plan approval, that we do a better job. And the developers and their attorneys do a better job of keeping it on schedule. There's no reason to have things go out for 24, 25 meetings or something ridiculous like that.
An entire year, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's nuts.
No, I feel bad for them as well as everybody else.
Oh, yeah.
I feel
But
bad
I think if we had, so if you could broaden the pitch to Kevin to say, it's not just, you know, it's not just the discussion about this one, but to sort of say, what should we be doing to memorialize in your very excellent memos to us is what should we have in our bylaw for site plan approval that we don't have now?
Just one last comment, Danny, maybe, and actually maybe you could just ask Kevin Freitag this. I mean, the other option could be, and sometimes we put letters together or comments together for different boards. Instead of memorializing it, it goes nowhere. Could we submit a letter to the ZBA?
Yeah.
And then it's a more memorialized, right? And we could vote on that. Not everybody has to vote in favor of it. But then it's a letter that goes over to the ZBA.
I guess the question I would have is if it's the same project that's going to the ZBA, because if it's not the same project,
Right.
yeah, we need to find that out first.
No, and I agree with you. Yeah.
And I think that actually is irrelevant. It doesn't matter what project it is. I would be in favor, Rich, of just drafting a letter and sending it to the ZBA. And then it's just for our own, it's not,
We could
doing
say,
anything that could be challenged by court. It would be just something that we would be doing
And it's not a vote.
within our town.
Letter.
And it's not a vote on, it's not site plan approval, denial or approval. It's just a memo on where we were on our conditions. And if you would make a motion, Rich, on that, I would second that. And maybe that's our solution. And we don't need legal counsel
We don't.
to send a letter to the ZBA.
Well, then there you go. We got 1 minute left and then we're at 10, but maybe that's the motion then as
We don't have a document in front of us that we're voting on it. And the other thing is, I would also.
Why don't we put it together and come back at our next meeting and just say, here's the letter, let's vote on it. I like that better. Thank you, Cheryl.
it would be the conditions. So we had full consensus on the majority of these conditions, and then we had majority of 3 on these 3 conditions. And that would be just what we wanted to.
I would want to be clear that it's referencing a particular set of documents for a particular project, because otherwise what relevance is it to a board to get a letter about something that they don't even know what it is? It might not be what's before them.
Absolutely. No, I think that's great too, Cheryl. So.
Okay.
Okay.
That sounds like
a better plan.
Okay, so we'll do that on the 24th. Well done.
motion to adjourn.
A second?
Second?
Okay, all in favor? Rich Beeler? Meredith Hall?
Yes.
Kathleen O'Donnell?
Yes.
Cheryl Tagayas?
Yes.
And goodbye from Fort Lauderdale.
Enjoy the rest of your time.
Yeah.
See you all on Monday.
As we face
The
a
Council on
monsoon
Aging.
on Saturday. Thanks a lot.
I'll never get home. I'll be calling you on some phone somewhere for town meeting. I don't know what's gonna happen. Okay. All right, everybody.
Great.
Have a good
Thanks.
week. Good night now. Bye-bye.